can you choose for you best Halloween of your adult life?
Best Halloween of my adult life is a slam dunk. It's
Mm-hmm.
11 years ago. It's the night I fell in love with Molly, my partner of 11 years. It's a
Amazing.
absolute we all hung out kind of mutually in the same hub house.
Yeah.
Like the sort of circle of friends where they overlap, and there's like the one person who all your circles of friends kind of overlap with. And for us, that was our friend Keegan, still our friend to this day. Way grown up from like the party guy, like frat boy house, pseudo frat boy house he used to be. Like now he's like a
Mhm.
real adult, and it's kind of crazy because
A
he's the guy
real
you
adult.
swore
I love that.
would never ever mature, right? Like, but 11 years.
Yeah.
No, so we like the first night she met me, I was sitting alone in a dark room with my gaming laptop on my lap, uh,
Yeah.
playing like League of Legends when I was supposed to be writing an article as a like a games journalist. She came in like all the lights were off. I was in the living room, and she had like a bag of laundry because she lived around the corner. She did her laundry over at the house. She opened the door. She looks over at me and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm just like, nothing. And she's like, the lights are off. And I'm like, yeah, it got dark while I was sitting here. And she's like, you could just get up and turn the lights on. And I'm like, impossible. And just very curt, like, I
Amazing.
have a very matter of fact, kind of dry, sarcastic sense of humor. And she just
Mhm.
busted my chops immediately, right? Like, just and we started walking our dogs together. And at the time, she's 20. The legal drinking age in Wisconsin in America is 21. And,
Okay.
like, me with free of like any ambitions or I just love Halloween, and I would have much rather
Hmm.
stayed home watching horror movies anyway than go out partying with
There you go.
everybody. So I'm like, oh, like if you want to, like I'm just gonna like watch a bunch of horror movies. You can come hang out, watch a bunch of horror flicks or whatever. And by the end of the night ended with her tricking me into leaving the house to go get mixers because we ran out of like stuff to
Yeah.
mix all our booze with, running back to her apartment and her kissing me on the front porch, and like that was like
That sounds amazing, man.
so.
And it's Halloween, so
Yeah.
it fits.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm the type of
Great.
person who wants to get married on Halloween, like in a masquerade, like
Hmm.
whole extravagant affair. It's my favorite holiday. Always has
Yeah.
been. It's just,
Same. Same over here.
yeah. It's
I love it. I've always loved it. We don't even have it, and it's always a joke in Greece when around this time in October comes up, and people are like, "Oh, you're going for Halloween. You're such a little American like
mhm,
that.
mhm.
Like you're not American. Why are you having Halloween?" But let's come on, man, enjoy yourself. Let people enjoy things,
Well,
and people love it. Like we do have the carnival in Greece. It's in February, but I don't know. It's starting to get very dark now, and it's the best time
hmm.
and you get into that spirit of like spooky things and all that. So uh, no regrets about that.
Well,
No
I mean,
regrets.
how did you? I mean, that's. I mean, we might as well just start right there. How did you, like a Grecian, how did you end up like how does Halloween end up over there? I know there's some European traditions with like Samhain and some stuff like that, but I know from most people I talk to, it's like a very American, like the way we
It's true.
overcapitalize everything, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, of course. I mean, it has to do with culture
mhm,
seeping over, and because of TV and shows and all that playing over, and Greek TV, people get into it. And after the internet has been such a big thing now, and through like everything's basically global and the good things tend to be picked up by people who enjoy it and like growing up loving D&D and stuff like that, you get into circles of people who enjoy international literature or cinema, films, series like that. So it was quite easy, to tell you the truth. People love dressing up. People love like trick or treating is not just such is not a thing. Maybe
mhm.
in Sweden, where I'm currently in, you do have people going trick or treating, and but partying and stuff like that. It's always fun. Plus, October in Greece, not that cold, so it's not that hard to dress up. I know that it's not the easiest thing over there,
Wisconsin's pretty
but
cold. Yeah, Wisconsin,
yeah,
we
there
get
you
pretty
go.
cold. Yeah.
So it's actually quite fun.
No, there's
A good thing to do. My best Halloween was 2 years ago, actually,
yeah.
because the wife and I we took a trip to Dublin and we had booked, which Dublin, it's like an hour from here, an hour and a half by plane, so it's nothing really.
Mm-hmm.
And we had booked every single thing that had to do with horror houses and all those live shows and attractions. Said, don't come over if you have a heart condition. Don't come over. That's pre-COVID, by the way. That's November 19th. And don't do all that. And we did every single thing. And then we found out that she was pregnant, but it was like a week pregnant.
Yeah.
So our boys, they are quite steeled now.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
been there from like week one of conception.
Well,
So that was best Halloween.
well, it's answering. It's very interesting because there's sort of like you're describing like a cultural osmosis, like globally, and then like also there's sort of like going to be this influence on your children, which my kids are much older,
Yeah.
8 and 5 respectively. But my obsession has turned into their obsession. Our whole house right now. I just came home with like a box, like a 5 foot long box with 2 skeletons in it, like 2 plastic skeletons. And you can
There
I've
you
just normal sight. Dad picking up a box with 2 skeletons in it, putting it in the back of his pickup truck after picking up his kids from school. Both my kids unflinching. All the kids
go.
watching them get into the car like with this 5 foot
My
box and
God.
skeletons in it,
Right.
just like
It's amazing.
like their
That's amazing.
face.
I'm still looking forward to that. Still looking forward to that, man.
Oh man, so I can see Chat Gang showing up. Hams fan dropping a tier 1 sub for 7 years of support. Thank you so much for that big support going on. And I'm of course Magical Mr. Mephisto. This is episode 108, I believe, of AOS RantCast. I'm joined by a very very special guest tonight. We're gonna be talking. This is my Halloween special. This is it. We're gonna get into it. I'm joined by a very special guest tonight, Dinos. He is a horror published writer, a hobbyist, and a horror enthusiast. But most importantly, a fan of Giannis Antetokounmpo. How's it going tonight?
That's our boy. Represent.
Yeah.
Yep. It's great to be with you, man. I love this. I'm excited. And we're going to talk horror. We're going to talk Age of Sigmar. To crossing the streams, as I said like 2 days ago, it's two of my passions right now. And so excited to be with a fellow enthusiast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, right on, right
And
on.
I know it's early right there, but it's still like 11:15 here, so it's a bit late. It's always late somewhere. It's always time to talk about things that go bump in the night.
Right, right,
So yeah,
right.
let's do it.
Right on. Yeah. So I mean, we were kind of talking about just sort of at the what will go on to be the cold open there, just talking about like getting into Halloween. I gotta wonder, is there like a movie? Was there a moment in your youth where you're like, I love scary crap? Like I'm looking at your
Um,
hobby, like you I mean, obviously your name on Twitter, Paint for the Paint God, is a play on Khorne. I saw a lot
yeah.
of like chaos and stuff like that. Like you talk about like overlap. Like I'm the
Mhm.
skeleton guy. Like I love undead and death and stuff like that. And there's a macabre
Yeah.
element in the horror I like that I read, but then also my hobby. Do you have?
Mhm.
Was there a moment for you? Did the Khorne love come first? Did the spooky come first, and then you saw Khorne models?
Yeah.
Like what? Can you take me maybe through that just a little bit? I want to get some background.
Sure thing. First of all, when it comes to horror, Greek mythology is what I grew up with, and Greek mythology is rife with horror elements, with the gods and the demigods and the monsters, and mortals being like puppets in strings of gods. And there's a lot of things there. And the more I grow up and I look back, I say, okay, there's quite a bit of things to dig out of there. And I always say that Greece is a country of ghosts because it's been there forever, and we walk and we breathe and we live where, well, basically hundreds and hundreds of generations before us have. So Greece is built on Greece, and everything underneath is still same. So I'm thinking that wow, there is a continuation there,
Hmm.
and I love ghost stories. Always loved ghost stories. I love writing ghost stories. Out of actually, I have 3 novels published and a short story collection. All three novels are ghost novels, and the one that's coming out next year is also a ghost novel. I just love the the idea and what they represent. But in terms of
Well, just real
starting the journey, yeah, go ahead.
just real quick, for what do ghosts represent for you? Like for your like.
I think ghosts represent missed opportunities. That's the thing. like when we say someone is haunted by mistakes they did or chances they didn't get or wrongdoings and things that they have never had the chance to revisit, these thoughts, these ideas that come back, this is what ghosts represent.
Mm-hmm.
Like my first novel is about basically a haunted telephone. It's a private detective who lives basically in his office, and there's a phone that rings, and there's spirits trying to reach out. And there's one specific spirit that's the ghost of his dead brother who wants revenge on him because he was the one who killed him
Mm-hmm.
accidentally, but still.
Yeah, yeah.
So that whole idea of things that have happened and you cannot change them. So the supernatural element in a story is what I think is the spice in a good story. It gives it a twist that is going to make the reader go, okay, awesome. But it's always the story. It's always the character.
See, just expanding on that, and I think we have similar horror sensibilities. I
Yeah.
think when you tell a sort of like a traditional fictional story, they're not usually suspending their disbelief as much as when they're reading something fantastical. If I tell you a story just about a guy who's like regretful that his brother died, that he killed him, you usually get caught up in the literalism of the story. If you say it's a ghost, then you get people into a metaphoric interpretation, which is where I'm trying to speak to you, like as my reader.
Yeah.
I want you not thinking about what gun he used to kill his brother, or the car. Like I don't want you thinking about where it was. I want you thinking about the vibe, the emotion, the I want you in a different state of mind than when you're taking in literal interpretations. And I think that
It's true.
horror specifically, and in more broadly that fantasy and sci-fi, they help us break down that like skepticism just a little bit,
Oh yeah.
to
Yeah,
receive
yeah.
the message, right? Like, and I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, sorry, not to get you
Yeah.
off too much. You were talking about like sort of
No
the
worries. No worries.
crossover, right?
I think actually, let me start by saying that Warhammer has been quite recent for me.
Okay.
Hasn't been too much, like 2017 maybe, not that much.
Mm-hmm.
Also, obviously, I knew Warhammer, but growing up in Greece, there was nobody playing around me. So, and I was a D&D guy. So we used to play a lot of D&D. I was a dungeon master because nobody else wanted to make stories, and I always
forever,
loved making stories.
forever
Yeah,
GM. Yeah.
I'm sure you've been there. You've been there.
Yeah.
And so Warhammer was more of a recent thing for me. And I don't see Khorne as I don't see any horrific in terms of what I love in horror. Like I don't really like gore that much. I love the supernatural, the psychological aspect of horror.
Yes.
That's why ghosts are my jam. And so my start in horror was twofold. It was Jacob's Ladder, the film, and Silent Hill. These two. I think they came out. I don't know if they came close to each other. They came out close to each other, but I did experience them both at around the same time. And both of them actually have this thing that I told you about ghosts and about making mistakes. Silent Hill 2 is a masterpiece that where it was if it was a book, it would have been one of the top horror books of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And at least at the time it came out, was something
Well,
like blew me away.
yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna like agree and just say more stuff. But Silent Hill 2, I think, is one of the best works of art that's ever graced any media. It's
Agreed.
the symbolism and the personal horror of it, that like they tried to translate some of the stuff that like out of
Mm-hmm.
Silent Hill 2 into other games and other stuff, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
people missed the reason Pyramid Head is so terrifying is because it's terrifying for James, right? It's
Yeah,
James and 2. Yeah. It's
it is.
terrifying for that character
Uh-huh.
and what it represents, his misogyny, his sort of like neglect of his wife,
Yeah.
his wandering eye while she was dying. Like it is his
Mhm.
like sort of personal demons personified, and that's why.
Exactly.
Go,
Imagine that. Imagine that. That is so human. That is so human for a person to be going through a drama, a tragedy, and at the same time being human, being drawn by another woman, maybe, or like a woman walking around,
just a nurse,
and
yeah,
that
right?
kills
Like,
him. That makes him
yeah,
that.
The
he's
guilt.
doing it to himself.
Yeah.
I just love Silent Hill is the best thing that has ever happened to me in terms of writing
Uh-huh.
because there are no books like Silent Hill. I actually looked up to see. I've done this so many times. There was a book by, oh man, why am I blacking out now? Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz. I think it was called Shadows or Whispers. It was about a city. They said it has Silent Hill vibes. It didn't actually go there, but still. So I thought I want to write this.
Mm.
I want to write a story like integrate the idea of people being drawn to a place, and that place is a like a crucible. It spits them out one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't write it in the beginning, being a very young writer. I'm talking now 2008, 2007.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to do it. I never did up to the point that I wrote a book and then I wrote another book. And finally, in 2017, I finished that book, that book about a village in Greece where a train takes people and leaves them there and they cannot just leave.
Mm-hmm.
It's my love letter to Silent Hill. It's not actually Silent Hill, and people who love Silent Hill say, finally, I read something that took me to that place, and that is
Yeah.
the biggest,
Well,
the biggest thing I've like. For me, it was a huge, like a medal of honor for me
yeah. Yeah.
to integrate into the Greek culture, and yeah.
I mean,
So these are the two. And Jacob's Ladder, if you think about it, it does actually have quite a bit of similarities between uh, at least the first Silent Hill,
well, there's
if
a
you remember the film.
purgatory, like Jacob's
Yeah,
Ladder. There's sort of purgatory of like hanging on. I mean,
yeah,
the I can't think of the name, but the sort of support father figure character he goes and talks to, and he says, you know, if
mhm.
you're afraid of dying, you know, you're gonna see demons tearing your soul out. But if you've accepted it, then the demons are really angels, like uplifting you
Angels.
from, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a V&V Nation song where they sample that quote, and it just
Mhm.
always that, but that purgatorio, the sort of that sort of purgatory there that the character's experiencing is very similar to like a Silent Hill. You know, I
Yeah.
think, you know, by the way, Steal Like an Artist, feel no shame. Like a lot of the films that have been in the coffin here,
Mhm.
this marathon, I started the marathon with two films that I consider love letters to the genre of horror. I
Mhm.
think there's something like horror, I think more than any genre is comfortable being self-referential. There
Oh yeah.
a lot of other genres out there like feel like they
Mhm.
have to like pretend they're unique snowflakes, that they came up with the idea first and they're doing it, you know, and if they didn't do it first then they do it the best. And like horror is like really comfortable just like being like, oh no, I love that practical effect that they used
Mhm.
in the thing, so I tried to riff
Yeah.
on it and then do it in this. And like that's
Speaking of,
go
in
ahead.
Jacob's Ladder, that the movement of the face, the
Yeah.
fast movement of the face that you see a lot, that was in Jacob's Ladder, first time.
Yeah.
So what you said is exactly that. And the thing about I think that horror is the most universal, like not just feeling, but as a genre. People will under some people might not understand science fiction. Some people might not get, I mean, like westerns or noir, but horror, being scared is so human, is so like it's personal at this, and at the same time, it's everyone's.
Hmm.
So obviously, you're gonna riff on ideas because it's it never touches the same person the same way
Right.
as it does other people.
Yeah.
But it gives you, it rises that. That's why I love what you said, that comedy and horror have similar vibes,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
true because they're both universal. Laughing and being scared is human. And the third that I put always is erotica, like this love, horror, and comedy. Those three things, they are so human that you will see them being played with each other.
Mm.
Barker does that. Clive Barker, when I read him, and he adds sexuality in it, and
The
you can
original
see it.
Cenobites, the books that went on to make the
Yeah,
Hellraiser, that was
yeah.
exactly that, exactly what you're describing. Go on, go on. Sorry.
So I think that you are touching on stuff that are so at the same time personal, unique, and everybody's, that this genre, if you suspend your disbelief and you accept that what you're doing now is not just trying to be scared, because it's not like I'm telling you now as an author, people say, I don't get scared. Why should I read your book? And the
Mm.
answer is because I did not write this book to scare you.
Yes.
I wrote this book to tell you a story, human story, a story of characters and people that I want you to think they're real. And if you do believe, through obviously through writing,
Yeah. Yeah.
when the scary part comes, you will not be scared, but you will believe when the character
Yes.
gets the feeling, gets the emotion.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. I think that horror as a story, horror in a story is the cog that makes the story move in a certain way. But without the story, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like I started reading a short story by someone who sent me their work, and the first phrase was, I don't remember the name now, but it was something like Mary screamed. Okay,
I don't care about Mary.
that's not horror, man.
Yeah.
Tell me who it is first.
Yeah.
Give me a reason. And a friend of mine, another writer of mine, says fiction, in contrast to reality, has to seem truthful,
Yes.
has to seem realistic.
Yep. I was
So
just talking about that
when you
last night
add,
in on my
yeah,
live stream. Yeah, go.
yeah, when you add the supernatural in it, you can make it seem realistic. You can make it seem that it belongs. I don't want to flood you, but I remember the guy who played Sam in Game of Thrones. They asked him, "Your character lives on the wall, and he's for months and years, and he's still fat. Why?" And his answer was, "Come on, this is a story about dragons and ghosts and all that. Why don't you believe that?" I said, "That has nothing to do with it. That has nothing to do with it. You are, what's the word? You are going to this a very wrong point of view. We can believe that this world has ghosts and dragons and everything,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to give me a reason why your character doesn't shed the weight because of the hardship and all that."
Mm-hmm.
That's not an answer. So that's why when you start writing or reading a book, you have to approach it through a lens of things that happen must have a reason that happens. They must follow rules, internal rules, even if it's the supernatural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just streamed Alan Wake for like five streams in a row. That's literally the whole plot of Alan Wake. Is it has
Yep.
to like horror has rules. There's rules. Writing in general has rules. Like we don't people don't
Yeah.
think of this. The truth is often stranger than fiction because reality doesn't really have to follow any rules. The not to bring
Exactly.
it back to the Bucks, but the plot line. If I wrote the story of how the Bucks won the championship, my editor would
Mhm.
hand me the book back and say, "It, I don't believe this."
Yeah.
Giannis, okay, so he's going to take a knee injury, and then the Bucks are going to win 2 games without him with historic performances from like two
Yeah.
players that are maligned for not being that good, and
Yeah.
then he's just going to come back from like what should be a career-ending injury, and they're like, that's bullshit. No, like you don't hyperextend your
Like
ACL and then just come
4 days
back and
later or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
like and then like okay, and then like he's going to struggle with free throws throughout the whole series, but then in the last game he's going to sink
Pull
17
off.
of 19 of
Yeah.
them, and they're just like
Yeah.
yeah, like no, no, it
Yeah.
doesn't. You got to at least show him getting better at free throws progressively, and then
Yeah.
and have him like a recursion to the mean type moment where he kind of loses his confidence and like no,
Mhm.
Giannis never lost his confidence throughout the whole playoffs. That's like the story of. So I mean it's yeah he transferred the knee injury, yeah no I mean but I think more importantly like when you mentioned like oh Sarah screamed or whatever, I think the
Mhm.
best horror isn't written from a place of like malaise or cynicism. I think the best
Yeah.
horror is written from a place of empathy. Because to make someone afraid, like like horror is in a sense yes universal because we all feel fear, but the things that make us afraid or scare us are a little different person to person. So like my
Yep.
story like ghosts might not scare one person. Like but like
Mhm.
exorcism type plots really scare somebody. Like, they can't handle them at all. And for some people, gore is just like funny, and like it's automatically in the category of unrealistic, so it's funny to them. So gore will never scare them. Body horror can't scare them, but like they can't handle like psychological thrillers because like the tension of like, you know, really close camera angles and all that stuff. It's like we all feel fear, but like how we experience it is differently. The thing that I think is most important is that the character in the story feels fear. And in order to get a character in the story to feel fear, as a writer, you have to empathize with them on some level. You have to like have an empathy for your characters to subject them to the horrible in a way that they'll feel terrible. Like, you can still have your like cool gore and all the affects of horror if you want, but at its heart, there's an empathy to horror. And I think that's what makes that's why comedy and horror for me are like, especially like two sides of the same coin. And I'll like absolutely concede to like erotica or like sexuality as a third sort of angle on that triangle. But horror and comedy, it's that subversion, it's that empathy. Hello, gang's my daughter. I'll try to fix it later. Okay,
and you can think back to what you talked about, James, in Silent Hill 2. That's where you get that sexual nature of the story that just makes it chef's kiss.
Yeah.
And yeah. So you talked about empathy, and I think we actually scheduled this cast by talking about Michael Flanagan and Midnight Mass, but also Haunting of Hill House and his whole work. I'm a huge fan, and I'm glad to see that you are also a huge fan. And so empathy is what makes him different from other creators right now. Yeah. You have to love the characters. You have to see Hill House, for me, is a masterpiece because it's what I said, not a love story in terms of one person and another person, but family.
Yes.
It's what I call my writing parental horror, which is what I do, and what I love writing is what's the biggest fear. And I have two boys right now, but even before becoming a parent, my biggest fear was the breaking of the family. I was lucky enough to be raised in a family that's still together, close-knit. So that fear of what if that goes away, that was from quite early, was in me. So I think horror and writing about horror, but also reading horror, is coping. It's a defense mechanism.
Yes.
Getting ready, getting prepared for what life brings. So he writes this type of, I'm afraid of the people I love. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose them. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose what I have. I might see it going away, just like in Midnight Mass. You see a derelict place of people being basically fading away, just like the community does. And you see their fear of trying to grasp on something, and religion is what they do in this story, to the effect that it has anyway.
Yeah, so I just finished Midnight Mass, and I'm not going to spoil it for anyone because it's like, you know, after like 2 years or 3 years, I don't feel bad spoiling something. It's the internet age. Like, I'm not personally culpable after like so many years of not spoiling like some of these films that I've had in this marathon, which I think the oldest is 1993 or something like that. Like, unless it's a true hidden gem and like literally nobody watched it, but like Midnight Mass is just, everyone go watch it. It's kind of, if you're familiar with like the language of horror, like how we communicate like horror things, there's a shot, I think it's in like the first 11 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I know what's going on here. And like, I'm not going to give it away for anybody, but like, even knowing kind of where it was going, I was just like, oh, this was so much better than I thought. Like, because he communicated to me, a horror aficionado, like all the stuff. It's the rules. It's got you got to like, you got to follow the rules, right? For me to like buy into the mythos of what's going on and the horror of everything. So he's setting his world, he's setting his stage, and like he kind of like gives up the game like immediately. There's a couple of really solid twists, but like for the most part, like broadly speaking, I'm like, okay, yeah, cool, got this in the first episode, but it didn't ruin it. It only, as it went on, and my expectations were subverted, it only, like, that establishing shot only recontextualized how I was supposed to be watching the rest of the film, even if I was clever enough to notice, like, the one shot
Yeah.
I did. And that's what Hill House does that too. Like, I think in terms of, like, the two, I think Haunting a Hill House is a masterpiece. I think it's certainly the
Yeah.
better work. But, like,
Hmm.
but what the thing that he does in Midnight Mass is it shows that he's honing his craft, and he's just
Yeah.
I
I
think
think he
Doctor's
knows.
go ahead.
He knows. He understands that. Okay, people will get it, and that's not the point. That's not where it breaks. Fine, some people will get it. Some people will read the language. Some people will see, but that's okay. If you go into this idea when you start writing something, start creating something, and saying it's fine, that the twist is not the point. There will be twists along the way, obviously,
Right.
but that's not the point. So let's build it up. Let's feed them some ideas that they know they're gonna grab. Some things will not pan out,
Mm-hmm.
but what you said, he honed his craft. I think he feels confident that it's gonna be okay. It's a
Mm-hmm.
slow burn. Also, it's a long series. Like I said, 7 episodes, and then episodes like 70 minutes long.
Yeah.
These are like almost short, not
Well,
even short films.
well,
So yeah.
there's a lot of monologuing in it too, and, like, normally there's part of me that would be like, oh, gross monologuing, but then like, the monologues are good, so I don't give a crap. Like, the characters
Yeah,
just, like,
I was
exchange
right with it.
monologues basically, and I'm like, this would be, when do you get to break the rules of fiction? When it's good
Mm-hmm.
is really what every exception ever boils down to, is when it's good or when you're doing something with it. But, like, so, like, all right, chat gang. This isn't a spoiler. I'm going to talk around the topic a little bit, but it would give context clues to kind of, like, a big deal with the story. So skip ahead about 1 minute, okay? And I'll tell you when it's safe. There's a conversation where two characters essentially monologue each other about, like, sort of like a big, what is death, right? And you know what I think it's around episode 4. They have this big monologue, and one character has such the stronger monologue as to be embarrassing the monologue the other character gave,
We follow up.
in
Yeah.
comparison. But then, like, at the end of it, it just, like, sticks the landing so hard on what was the weaker monologue, that my mind was blown, and I sat there after I finished. I stayed up till like 2 a.m. last night.
Yeah.
I was done with it at 1 a.m. last night, and I sat there for the next hour, just somewhat in bed, kind of getting out, getting a glass of water, just thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
horror at its best, like I mentioned, like, that it's subversive, and we talked about how it's like a subversive media a little bit, and it pulls you in with its sort of, like, mythos and its rules and its suspension of disbelief. But what horror, I think, really does better than any other medium, and I think fiction in general, is it gives you a safe space to process ideas, right? Like, just to think about ideas and process ideas, like you know. But what horror does is it gives you a safe space to process trauma, and that's powerful. Like,
Oh, absolutely. See it happen in characters that you actually love, you grow to love. And I think that what makes horror novels and like whatever media it is, when you care about the characters and at some point you do realize that you're reading a horror story,
mm-hmm.
you know that something bad's going to happen. And that speaks to your own sensibilities and saying, "Ah, at some point, something bad's going to happen. I just know it."
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you do know it because it's a book.
Mm-hmm.
And until the book is over, you have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe you do. Maybe you have some thoughts. Maybe you receive. I know where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's. I don't think that's getting into the spirit. You don't have to know where is it going, or you say, "Okay, I get it. I can see the signs. I'm just here for the ride, though."
Yeah, and the
You know?
concern for the characters will carry you through. Like,
Oh yeah,
you don't personally have to be afraid, but if the characters are afraid, and you like the characters and you're concerned for the characters, then you'll stay
exactly.
invested in the ride. Now there is a
Yeah.
different type of horror, like the sort of schlock fest that can be its own type of thing. And I think that's kind of like really like obsessed with the affects and the genre itself. And I appreciate that stuff too. Like Murder Party is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It is not this highbrow horror we're talking about right now.
No.
It is the opposite of that, but it gets there. One, it does have an extremely likable main character. Like I adore the character and I want him to win at all. Like in every scene, I want him to win. And then from there, it's the an exercise in sort of horror, like mechanical horror, setup and subversion, like just scene to scene. They set up something at the beginning of the scene, subvert it, and then they just do that every shot. And it's like it's textbook, it's rhythmic, and there's like a ballet to it, like that I absolutely love. But like again, like
that's fun. Like that's fun horror. It reminds me of like playing tag in a sense, or being very young and playing hide and seek.
Yeah.
You watch the film and you say, all right, let's see who's gonna be next, who's gonna survive this thing. It just goes back because your brain understands this is fun. You're watching a fun film, like going back to Scream and all the movies that came after it. And this is what I felt about it. Says this is a fun film.
Or Wes Craven's New Nightmare did it.
This is not Hereditary or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not how it goes. So quite different, but again, at the same time, it speaks to something in us. And people tend to love horror or scary stories since they're by the time they're children and growing up. You say, I always loved horror. I say I always love horror, and I don't even remember where that started in a sense, but I always say, as a child, I love scary stories. I love Greek mythology. It was always there. So there's always something there.
Yeah.
And you can always find like scary stories and strands of ideas, prompts, even in Age of Sigmar, which we're gonna get to at some point.
Yeah.
Not that I mind. Let's talk horror all night long. It's all good.
Well, you said like you maybe there's I wonder like if just distantly if there's sort of like a predisposition that people have toward horror, or if it does hook you young, like if you read Goosebumps, or I remember Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon, if there's just that one like sort of one of those just diet horror movies that catches you young, or like you catch when something like Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th is like it's faux pas, it's taboo, and so it's like steeped in this mystique, and you're not supposed to watch it as a kid, but then you convince like your mom to rent it for you, or you go and sneak it from a neighbor who's older or whatever it is, and then you sit there and you watch this like coveted thing with your friends when you're way too young to see it for the first time. And I wonder if there's something to that too, like if there's a little bit of that, if there is some child glee in horror as well, like
absolutely, absolutely. I think that that should be it. Like I remember being quite a little boy, and we had a TV in my brother's bedroom, and it was late, and I turned on the TV, and it was Dracula, like Coppola's Dracula. It was right at the point, because I remember it very clearly, the point where the windows break and blood streams in. I think that was when probably Lucy died. I don't really remember, but I do remember that scene. I was like, what just happened in front of me? I was like 8 maybe, or 9, something like that. I do remember that. And that glee that you said, that must be there, because I remember that idea with a smile, not with trauma, So
and yet as I grew up, like as I grew up, and this is something that I only recently admitted, I guess, or admitted to myself, and I don't know that I've ever really said it out loud, is I've written horror stories in one capacity or another very long time. For me, a lot of it was dealing with violence. So I usually have you have a propensity for like ghost stories, right? For me, it was usually like the is the character crazy, or is it is he a little bit more on the Jacob's Ladder side, where like, is he losing his grip with reality, or are the demons real? Like I've always written kind of like that type of stuff, where like there's that period where you're like, this character might just be crazy, and and often very violent things, because I was growing up in a family, a broken household with a lot of substance abuse and stuff like that, and so I would escape to like Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs where I could go and create a story and then have my friends triumph over it, and then in them beating the demon monsters I made up for them to fight, they were kind of beating one of my demons. I had these
Yeah.
very visceral monsters that I would create in D&D. And Katie, if you're watching, I'm sorry. She was watching the other night and she mentioned the thin ones, which are one of these monsters I had created, which are these if you can imagine these sort of pulled super thin, almost like coat hangers of ink and tar, just stretched super
Mm-hmm.
thin, 7 feet tall, almost two-dimensional when you stare at them, that just kind of fold up and unfurl inside the body of their host, and they just sort of stretch
Okay.
out along your veins and essentially treat you like a marionette. And this sort of infestation of these thin ones were taking over the world. And we were talking ambiently about like horror creatures and stuff like that. How I always accidentally end up with something like this in one of my campaigns, whether I'm making a horror game or not.
Mm-hmm.
I had this Time Lord where people were caught in this time loop where, like, yeah, it's a Time Lord, ha ha ha, but then also it was like, oh yeah, but the place they're caught is like fucking Silent Hill. And
Mm-hmm.
it like, because the ghosts of time have started to take over everything, these little phantoms, as the time loops back on itself, it begins to erode and decay. And so I've always told these like really sort of fantastical stories, and I accidentally subject people to these monsters. And something I only recently sort of realized is, with my fiction especially, very violent and usually very cynical. And it
Mm-hmm.
was only upon recognizing like the difference in the horror I found myself really loving, and the stuff that I thought was kind of like cheap or shoddy or crappy. And I don't mean that
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of it's poor, it's not expensive to make or whatever, but just a cheap experience. It was always
Yeah.
recognizing that I was more the former. I was more that than the sympathetic, empathetic. Like I would have a character and I hated that character, like me, and usually it was the main
Mm-hmm.
character, right? Like my insert. And I'm
Yeah.
subjecting the violence to that character because I
Mm-hmm.
don't like them. I don't like myself right now, so I have to torture this character because I'm torturing myself. And in
Yeah.
a way, it's like a self-flagellation that would help me like exercise whatever demons I had at the time growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got older and I started like telling stories for other people, um, realizing that I was subjecting them to like my monsters so that they could beat the monster, and there was some triumph there, and getting the catharsis from that was where I started to recognize that that empathy and the other aspect of horror that was a little bit like, if I tried to
Mm-hmm.
write Silent Hill, something you were saying really really early on is like you weren't, I don't know, mature enough or old enough to write the Silent Hill story, and it just,
Mm-hmm.
as we've been talking here, I know for a fact I wouldn't have been old enough to write it either, because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't get it the same way I get it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Like there's a
I see what you mean. Yeah, because I was thinking that when I sat and wrote the stories, the novel is called Saint Nothing, Saint Nothing, and basically it's very common in Greece to name villages like Saint George or Saint Peter, whatever. Very typical. And the place they go is called the Saints, and people usually ask Saint what, because it's you cannot just say Saint. No, nothing. That's it. So the idea there is that people will go and they will. First of all, you don't know who's alive and who's dead in the story, and that doesn't really matter in a sense, because if whether they're living or dying in this story, there it doesn't really matter, because what they drag themselves through, this hell, this um, purgatory, as you said, it
Mhm.
doesn't really matter, because it's an idea of a spirit, of a soul, of a conscience, whatever you want to name it.
Right.
And there's actually, I realized while writing, that said, I have a living person hunting, no, chasing a ghost inside a house.
Mhm.
There's a living person chasing a ghost, and the ghost is the character, one of the characters, being afraid for himself, because dying is not the worst thing that has happened to them.
Mm.
And what you talk about, taking yourself through, like punishing yourself in a sense, I see that. And it's not always punishing, but questioning yourself, questioning your choices and your thoughts. and taking it through in a sense, in a grinder, and say, what about this thing, like cynicism that you talked, or visceral violence going through it. But it cannot only be that. It can also be discussions between characters. And again, it's your voice from both sides. That was so amazing when I was talking about how do you write dialogue. You say you write the character, you think about the character, and the character will tell you what to write in
They
a
do.
sense.
They do.
So, and I find that so amazing when you create stories, even in D&D, even in RPGs,
Yeah.
in a sense. I actually, in a sense, quit role-playing games to start writing the stories because, well, my friends weren't that much into it. I would create a story, and my players were not that, well, like high school kids. You know how we were. But if you have a passion, even as a high school kid, to create a story, you cannot actually expect your friends, even your best pals, to be that much into it. So that's where I actually started writing. That's why I was talking the other day and said, being in your 30s, even in your 40s, which I don't know yet, is probably the best time to play RPGs because the people who want to play RPGs will be into it. And when you're in your 30s and your 40s, you have a much better sense of how these things work, which is fun, but it's also the story is important, the characters are important. And so, what you said earlier about I like Horus defense. I actually paused writing for a while because of a sudden loss, something quite unexpected, and it was at the time when I was correcting my most recent book that came out in 2018, or no, 2019. But in 2018, I lost someone. It was very unexpected, very sudden. One day good, the other day gone. And because I was editing the book is about loss. It's about, uh, well, it's the book. It's a Silent Hill book, and
Yeah.
it's about people losing others. That was very, very difficult for me to go through. And after that, I actually stopped writing for a while, and I picked up painting because, like mini painting, that's when I actually started really focusing on painting and not writing. So that was where my journey took me to, you know, I actually write in my Instagram. By the way, this is not my Bookstagram. Please don't add me here
Yeah.
because I have my authors page and my authors other pages for it. So that's why my Instagram was actually don't add me for books,
Yeah.
even though the people keep tagging me in, which is fine, but doesn't happen that much now. But that's how it started. I said, you know what? I just want to paint. This thing will be done. I have control over it, which is something that it's not that easy to do with a novel because you never have complete control over a
See,
novel.
I
But a
don't.
miniature, you have control over it. You say, you know what? I'm just gonna do it to the best that I can. It's gonna take a day, two, maybe. That's it. But a novel is months, and you know how it is.
Well, the part where you're talking about the dialogue. So, I usually like try to. I start with the characters. Like, I'll have an idea for a
Mhm.
story, and how I always start every story with the characters once I have an idea. Like, I want to tell a story about. Well, right now the one I'm working on is it's got macabre elements, but it's not really a horror story. It's a very flamboyant story. Just kind of changing gears because the last story I was working on, I was really locked in a self-referential, self-reflective, introspective, like just taking everything that was going on with me for a spell and my own sort of putting my own creativity under a lens and interrogating my own
Mhm.
creativity. The last story I told took me 2 years to tell, and the ways I had to contort myself to tell that story
Mhm.
took their toll. So this most recent story, I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna like write something for fun again.
Mhm.
But so I'm like, okay, the story I want to write is like character goes drag races the devil in hell for his girlfriend's soul back, right? Like that's basic premise, right? That's it. Nothing.
Orpheus and Eurydice
What was that?
told 4,000. You know, Orpheus and Eurydice told 4,000 years later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just
Love it.
yeah, yeah. Or Dante's Inferno, right? Or the
Yeah.
Divine Comedy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like just doing that And then, but now I need characters to go through that. So then it's like, okay, well, I know my premise, the story I want to tell. Okay, now I need characters for this. And then I sit there and I write all the characters down. And I write, okay, kind of get an idea as I'm writing out the characters. I'm getting an idea of the interactions I want the characters to have down the line, which is a
Mm-hmm.
trap, but because they'll very rarely end up in the same room the way you thought they would. Um, and you get the characters all fleshed out, and give the characters their own little backstories and
Yeah.
who they are and everything they've done. And then I take
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff I wrote about the characters and I basically throw it away. Like I move it off to the side. I'll never read it again. And then I start
Mm-hmm.
writing the story. So that when the
Gotcha.
characters begin to interact in the story I'm writing, they
Mm-hmm.
have their own life. Like I've built them and they'll start doing things that I didn't intend just because the way I'm in the scene and I'm writing and their life comes to them and they'll just like I didn't want a love interest in my last story I wrote. Um,
It just happened,
it
didn't it?
just happened. I'm like I didn't want a love story here. I'm like
Yep.
these two characters had such attention while they were like talking. I found them like quipping off of each other a little bit more and the romance developing as the story went on and I'm like you
Mm-hmm.
guys just went against my wishes because like I wanted a whole thing about like I'm trying to have a lot more like platonic love in a lot of my stories, like more platonic because I think just positive, non-sexual love amongst like your peer group I think is something that we need to work on a little bit more. Certainly in America because we're reckless individuals and I think it's taking its toll on our collective
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, not just like feeling love for each other, but um, so I'm like trying to write more platonic love stories and stuff like that. But these two fucking characters went against my wishes of that because
They decided themselves.
they decided themselves, and it's funny.
People will
Go ahead.
hear this and they say, "What? That's not how it works." No, it's absolutely how it works. And when you think I'm just gonna make a little like a painting simile, like, all right, I'm gonna paint this thing. Suddenly, the next day, the cloak is blue, and before starting, that cloak should have been red or something.
Mm-hmm.
So who decided? Well, you see the thing and you say, well, it that way. I didn't have it in mind, but here it is.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, it doesn't translate really well in English, but my character in my first novel was, in a sense, his name means stop. It's a very typical name. Stamatis is a very typical name in Greek, but stamata means stop.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been like his name is Light, but his um, last name is Red. So I had this discussion between him and this other character, and they go, "And what's your last name?" It's Light. So and she goes, "So your name is Red Light, and you work in traffic?" And that blew my own mind because I hadn't even made the connection
Mm-hmm.
up to the point when he said Light, and she answered, "So your name is Red Light, and you work in traffic?" I'm like, "Holy shit, that's
Yeah.
true."
Yeah.
So that's the one. That's always the first example that comes to mind, and it's so amazing when it happens. It's so amazing when you
Yeah.
decide, well, that's where it goes because it's not the plot, it's the character. My agent told me when I gave her my second novel, she said these two should be together. I said no, that's not the characters.
Yeah.
Maybe the plot could have gone that way, but that's not the characters. They should not be together. And this is a character who lost his wife, and there's another character who she dearly loves him in a very well, she always loved him,
Uh-huh.
but he's not there. She would like to be with him, but he's not there. And my agent said, when they're walking there, shouldn't she go for it? I said, well, she does, but he says stop because he has lost his wife. It's been very, since recent 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not him. So she would have said, but yeah, that should be a love interest. No, you know what? No, you don't have to go there. The character did not go there. The character stopped her before I decided that he should stop her,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
And that's the magic of writing. And when it happens, it sings.
Yes.
So that's how it is.
Yeah.
So amazing to do.
Well, it's for people who aren't necessarily writers, but maybe tabletop gamers. It's a lot like when you write a story for like your like when you're writing like an RPG adventure. And like you write some stuff that you intend, but your players don't necessarily like your players have their own intentions they're living, breathing adults with lives playing a character in
Mhm.
your world, quote unquote. And they'll make a decision to do something, and it will like just be better than you'd ever planned, and they'll pick up on a detail you didn't realize you put in the world. You're like, oh yeah, I did mention that, didn't I? And then and suddenly they've like kind of like ad-libbed themselves into this magical
Mhm.
place that you like maybe set up, but you didn't really necessarily. That wasn't where you were going. But the characters, they have so much agency of their own,
Mhm.
and you start to sort of like harmonize with your player group. That same thing happens with writing too. And
Yep.
I'm not convinced that the characters I create for the worlds and the stories I tell are any less real than any character ever played by one of my friends or anything else, because of just
100%.
the I believe firmly still like an artist. I am constantly ripping off my own influences over and over and over again. Like I don't think there's a unique plot in all of fiction. I think they've all been done to death. So it's just about doing it your way and doing it
Yep.
entertainingly and doing it interestingly with characters you want to see there. Every Coen
Mhm.
brothers film, like Oh Brother Where Art Thou? It's just the Iliad, but what if instead of except instead of like that time period, it's
Yeah.
deep South America. Like, and
No.
like, what if what if we have a heist, kidnapping plot, except it's the dude, like some like shaggy, like taking
I
like
agree.
different stories and just kind of like allowing yourself to, like I said,
Mhm.
other genres are very pretentious about pretending they didn't just rip off their influences. Horror's got an honesty to it.
Yeah.
It's the best horror in my mind. They make love letters to the genre. They're
Yeah.
always you're always kind of like you said, like with Silent Hill.
Mhm.
Like yeah, I don't know. I I do I'm sensing a through fare, like a through line from like our
Mhm.
earliest influences, because Jacob's Ladder and Silent Hill were both very formative for me as well, and
Yeah.
I got obsessed with the aesthetic of that stuff before I got it. I picked up on the undertones and the other stuff
Mhm.
as I got older and I matured as someone. Uh,
Mhm. I think the thin ones you talked about, the thin people. I loved what you described. I could just see it very, very clearly. I think Robert Bloch wrote something similar
uh
to that, but in that sense, it was just a person behind a lamplight in the middle of the street. But what you described, it's basically this being afraid and being all that whatever negative feelings these things make you and stretch it in a sense.
hmm
That's how I saw it in my mind. Like
Yeah,
you said it, and my mind went a million miles an hour
yeah,
because what you talked about is human. But what Block's story was, there was a thin person who walked and got disappeared behind a lamplight, and that gives you thoughts, and it can spook you and all that. But what you talked about, which maybe you came across it earlier, maybe you read Bloch when you were younger or something, or
yeah,
you saw that idea. What you described, someone could have said, "Oh yeah, that's Bloch." No, that's you.
yeah.
What you described actually touched me in that sense. I said, "Wow, imagine that."
Well,
So yeah.
I think it came from a place of uh, like the idea of them like being an invasive force that like kind of gets in
Mhm.
you and takes over your veins and pulls at you is I could psychoanalyze it and I would probably be wrong because psychology is way more complex than we like to make it. But an early experience of my mom with a needle and heroin and an overdose and having to call 911, like I can imagine,
Mhm.
some struggles I had later on where I'm worried that I'm descending into the same like afflictions my mom was with my
Mhm.
alcohol, and I did it for fun, but now I'm just doing it every day and like thinking that I'm not in necessarily control of myself anymore. And if there's this
Mhm.
invasive presence that
Lack
gets
of
inside,
control.
that gets
Lack of
inside.
control. What a scary feeling.
Yeah,
What a scary, scary feeling.
yeah,
And exploring it through writing or reading, that's a way to cope.
yeah,
I always come back to the word coping.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I see we got gits are pretty spooky. The bad moon's influence corrupts the land when it draws
Oh
close,
yeah.
spreading madness and mutation. I guess we could get into it a little bit now. So you keep mentioning
Yeah.
like your love of ghost stories and Greek mythology
Mhm.
and stuff like that, which is it's really interesting because as an I'm not Greek. I'm of Irish, mostly Irish descent.
Hmm.
Second generation Irish immigrants. My grandparents came over here on both sides of the family, and then
Hmm.
America happened here. But I always look, like for me, reading Greek mythology is like it's almost like it's like agnostic. It's divorced from like
Hmm.
culture. Like
Yeah,
I'm
I get it. It's like me reading Scandinavian gods and all that,
yeah
like Thor and Odin and all that stories. For me,
yeah.
I see what you mean. I get what you mean.
But for you, like growing up with Greek mythology, it's not just reading like this. You're not like divorced from it. It's part of your heritage
Mhm.
and culture. So
Yeah.
that's got to be. And I'm just it just kind of dawned on me that these
Mhm.
sometimes when, like I think we have a what is it I'm looking for. I don't think we always recognize how incomplete our perspectives are on things, even as an
Mhm.
appreciator of stuff.
Yeah.
Just so. Um,
Yeah,
but
this weight of time, what you're talking about, like there is a weight. Like if you go to Thermopylae, the hot gates, as in 300 they called it. Thermopylae means literally hot gates. If you go there and dig, after 5 minutes, you will find arrowheads. With still, if you go there, it's gonna take 5 minutes, and you will dig. Like they stop digging for them, like Persian arrowheads of thousands and thousands of arrows, and like the museums are full of them because they're there. And the idea of this going through, like, it's almost a mythical idea. 2,500 years ago, that idea is there. Like, I used to, my university is called the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. That's where Aristotle used to live, where I actually had my university years. Or in my hometown, right next door, is where the person who thought of the idea of the atom lived. So that idea of time and of this great weight of what you talk about culture and generations of getting here, that like that gives you pause in a sense.
mm-hmm,
And you can imagine how unique are we in the end.
mm-hmm,
How unique are we? So I come back to that monologue you talked about in Midnight Mass, and talked about, in the end at least, about uniqueness.
mm-hmm,
So this is cosmic horror in a sense.
mm-hmm.
And I do like cosmic horror.
Same.
The idea that we're infinitesimal. There was this story where I don't remember the name of the short story, but there is this man who like runs in the church and starts shouting that the your prayers don't go to the ears that you think. The thing that hears you is cold and cares not. Something like that. Is inhuman and
Super
cold
metal.
and cares not. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Like
Yeah.
he said, you have the eyes of the worm and the ears of stone. I love it. Like
Yeah.
it
No.
just these are like little prompts. But that was my idea about this rantcast. We are ranting, which is on point.
Yeah. Yeah. Way on
And
brand.
the idea of prompts of ideas. Like I had an idea of someone losing, having someone being afflicted,
Yeah.
like having a diseased kid, and they hear a cackling voice from inside the hole of a tree, and that voice says, "You can save your kid. The only thing you need to do is take my breath and take it to the village as well." And the cackling voice is nurgling. It says, "Just throw my breath in the well, and you will save your kid." And obviously, the well is poisoned by Nurgle, and everybody dies, but the kid lives. But the way it lives is in a very, very horrific for the person, for the parent way, before the harbingers come over and take her to make her harbinger of decay, which is the lore behind the harbinger of decay. Like they come and take kids from villages and turn them into harbingers,
Yeah.
and I love that idea. And that was a prompt,
Yeah.
a nurgling talking through a hole in a tree, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
So
so
this was a prompt, and it made that story in my mind.
have you written this, or this is just something a thought to explore?
No, it's been living in my mind for, well, since I started playing Nurgle. That was like 2019 or something.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
See, I think, and now maybe we can transition. Normally, we reverse the format. Normally, we
Mhm.
pretend we're talking about Age of Sigmar, and then
Hmm.
after about like an hour, then we flipped to talking about like literally everything else that I was
Yeah.
trying to like tie Age of Sigmar to. We've just done the
Yeah.
opposite, so now we talk about Age of Sigmar. Just one final thing before we go on to some like horror writing prompts for Age of Sigmar, and
Yeah.
I kind of lay out my conundrum with Age of Sigmar
Hmm.
horror. And this is a personal conundrum. This isn't like a critical analysis of Age of Sigmar and horror or anything like that. It's just like something I've struggled with
Hmm.
personally. I just want to say, like, for me, Age of Sigmar has always read very Greek mythology, like very,
Yeah.
very,
Demigods,
yeah,
gods walking around us and all that.
yeah,
Yeah.
like the gods are humanity turned to 11. They have not only are they like all powerful and stuff like that, but they also have all of our vices and like all everything's turned up with them. We like as someone
Yeah.
who loves loves Greek mythology, but is also like Grecian. Is that your read too? Am I crazy? Is there something to it?
100%. You know, you have Sigmar, who's Zeus, and you have Nagash, who's Hades
Hades,
or
yeah,
Pluto, however you want to call it. Gorka Morka, who's Ares, who hunts and is the god of war in a sense. He's bloodthirsty and all that. And you have the mortals, and the gods in Greek mythology are very, very, in a sense, childish.
yeah, petty,
Their emotions are huge, petty. Great, great word. And it's there. It's I see it, and I can understand that when we are talking about Hero Hammer, Age of Sigmar is turned into Hero Hammer. Everybody plays Teclis or Nagash or Archeon. I'm like, yeah, I don't mind.
yeah. I
I
don't
don't, it
either.
feels correct. It
Yeah.
feels right in my head in that sense.
See,
So yeah, that it is there. What you're talking about, it's there. I can see it, and it's. I think it was a reason why I think I got into it because it spoke to that idea of demigods and gods walking the earth
yeah.
and mortals trying to, in a sense, resist or join and all that.
Well, just
I
trying to
love the
get
idea that
through it,
they
right? Like
run
to
for each. Yeah,
yeah, like
yeah.
yeah. I mean, and we sit in this sort of mythic mentality for Age of Sigmar. And by the
Mhm.
way, a hot take for not necessarily chat gang because they know where I come at this issue, but anyone who happens upon the VOD, um, Hero Hammer is a word that means two different things. That
Mhm.
is absorbing the old connotation and negativity from when it meant something completely different in an old edition of the game and
Yep.
repurposed because it's colloquially convenient for now.
Mhm.
Hero Hammer before, like literally you stacked your heroes and like you put them in your little units and you duel them and the game broke down in that sense. Here, yeah,
Mhm.
there are hero, but it's not the same type of game that's playing out that people are alluding to. So they're pulling the
Mhm.
negative connotation from the old bad like the old bad way, and just ascribing it to the new connotation, and so it gets like
Yeah.
just becomes this weighted term that's like interwoven with like old biases and new biases and alike, and I just
Yeah,
find it
and I
sort of
feel like
go ahead.
I'm lucky there because I started the game in like 9 months before 2.0 came out. So it was they already knew what 2.0 is going to look like for them.
Right.
Like Idneth had just come out, Nurgle had just come out, the books. So we were on our way to 2.0. So for me, I feel lucky because I can always go back to the lore and read things. I sat and read the Vampire Counts book a few months ago, read about the Karsteins and all those,
Yeah.
which was fun for me. But I'm pretty sure that the game is in a healthy spot right now.
Hmm.
So, and even lore wise, I think that the lore of the game is at a good enough place, like good enough for me. I don't need more, but I do love reading it.
Hmm.
Like reading the short fictions, the flash fictions, and the battle tomes is my favorite thing
Hmm.
from the battle. Like those little 150 word stories they have,
Yeah.
that what we call flash fiction,
Yeah.
and I think that all that negativity and those negative connotations, they don't really stick for us, yeah, newer players.
Yeah. If you
So
parachute
in
into
that sense, I feel like I'm lucky.
yeah, if you
You know?
parachute into Age of Sigmar right now, like you don't carry the weight from that stuff. Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
But so where I was kind of going with that is just reset to me. Age of Sigmar is for me it feels mythic, and I've always
Hmm.
heard it said from more my film friends on the side of like horror. Like I'm certainly come at it from a writer stance and think of things like as a writer and. The film I think about as an appreciator of film, not so much a crafter of film. So it's a little bit different.
Hmm.
But a like a few of my horror friends who are in the films like business, they always
Mhm.
say that the difference for them between shooting horror and shooting comedy is where you shoot the camera.
Mhm.
Like, and I think that horror in Age of Sigmar is something that could be really compelling. Like you mentioned your writing prompt of like it's a nurgling in a tree. And
Mhm.
we're usually zoomed out of the battlefield. We're disconnected. We're ambient, floating above it, watching
Yeah.
these things. And to put the horror into Age of Sigmar, I think you got to put the camera
Zoom
down.
in.
Yeah, you got to zoom
Yep.
that camera in.
100%. I
And
had an idea, another prompt about it if you want to hear it.
yeah,
And the idea came out of miscast. How ridiculous is that? Like miscast, two ones. I had an
yeah,
idea about a mage, probably the collegiate. What are they called? Collegiate arcane or
yeah,
something like that.
collegiate
Never
arcane.
said
Yeah,
it
yeah,
out loud.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he is probably in one of those cities that maybe Hollowheart, maybe I don't know, in Akshi, and he's trying to make a protection spell, and he has captured a little demon, probably a Zinch demon,
Hmm.
and there is a back and forth between them. And when he realized that he's made a huge mistake in the spell, and the the like a seal gate spell that has horribly miscasted. So there are runes start appearing on his chest, on his gut, on his arms. And he realizes that this is a gate, and this gate will open
Mm.
through him, and through him, everything's gonna come out. So he needs to leave the city as fast as he can, and the demon follows him because the demon is now free because he miscast so bad that his own protection circle is broken. So the demon is ridiculing him. Again, a little demon and one nameless mage in the middle of a city that we know. And this mage knows that he needs to leave the city as fast as possible. Otherwise, he's going to be a gate where from which demons are going to come out. But the city is protected by Stormcast, and Stormcast tried to snuff out chaos, and he's literally a beacon of chaos.
Hmm.
And this thing is starting to light up, so he needs to run as fast as possible and still avoid the Stormcast. We don't understand that he cannot die, because if he dies,
Hmm.
everything opens up.
Yeah.
And that started from the idea of miscast. So
Mm.
I could even see him trying to go through the city, trying to avoid guards, trying to avoid suspicion. But how can you do that when it's in the middle of the night and there's a person running for not just for his life, because his life is gone, he knows it, and the demon tells him, you're dead, you're gone, you will be dust, and everything around you will also be dust because you made a big mistake, my friend, or
Hmm.
something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know, it's miscast, I love it, it's just a little prompt, but that's what you talked about, zooming in.
Hmm.
It's not an idea about Nagash or Teclis or Archeon.
Hmm.
It's an idea where you go as in as possible, because we cannot actually. I understand what that your problem with AOS and horror is, that how do you communicate in a sense with character
Well,
when a character is just like bigger than life.
well, for me, I've had a few problems with writing fiction for Age of Sigmar. Specifically,
Mm-hmm.
one of them is I tend to be a fantastical kind of like even my horror stuff gets goes into that like Jacob's Ladder kind of like weird
Mm-hmm.
esoterica. And when I'm not doing that, I'm being rather like tongue in cheek. Like the esoterica horror of Age of Sigmar for me doesn't feel like it's horror. It feels like it's fantasy. It feels like it's
Mm-hmm.
mythic. It feels like it's over the top. And so my struggle
Gotcha.
is zooming that camera in a manner where I can still have my flights of fancy,
Mm-hmm.
live in my realm of metaphor, but then to have that metaphor be literally, quote unquote, literally scary.
Mm-hmm.
In the literal sense for the characters, and that's for me. There's a small disconnect. The other part is my ability to put myself in the world of Age of Sigmar as like a foot troop or as a just a regular necromancer. Like I tend to play bad guys, and you
Mm-hmm.
know that's where I like Mike Flanagan again. Um, say that 5 times fast. Where I like Mike Flanagan's approach to horror, he's got an empathy even for the villains,
Oh yeah.
and it's just
Oh
something
yeah.
you
God
don't
damn him. Yeah.
like. Like there's a lot of horror that celebrates its villains, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of horror that necessarily has empathy for the devil, right, or sympathy for the devil.
Yeah.
Like Jason is very much celebrated but you're not empathizing with Jason, because if you were
No.
empathizing with Jason, especially mortal Jason, sort of pre-zombie Jason, you'd wonder about the
Mhm.
psychological state that Jason has to be in to be this ruthless killer. We'd we'd get we'd see Jason struggling with the fact that he's just a wanton murderer, right? Like we'd
Mhm.
see him, or we wouldn't see him struggling with it, but the empathy there would be in some other manner where like he's like, I know I should feel bad about this, but I don't, right? Like we don't that. But like with Mike Flanagan with Rose with the Hat really comes to mind as one probably the
On
best
Doctor Sleep.
on screen vampires I have seen in I don't know how long. And
Hmm.
shout out to Stephen King for the idea to kind of reconceptualize vampires that way, but really like the Doctor Sleep, the film, is the empathy for Rose with a Hat and like the sort of like the vampires, quote unquote, in that film
What?
is part of me is what makes it such a tense movie. It's not like overtly like terrifying in any sense. Like it mostly lingers on suspense and concern, but
Hmm.
you end up with this kind of like concern for the villains or the antagonists, and knowing that it has to come to a head with your concern for the characters, for the Doctor Sleep and the
Yeah.
and the girl in it. So you end up with this like you're like, man, I really like these characters, but I get where the bad guys are coming from, and you know that that tension's going
Hmm.
to lead to them clashing, and
Yeah.
and that suspense
I,
is what makes. I mean, I think Doctor Sleep is one of the better.
I find that Slaves to Darkness have that.
Yeah,
The idea that
yeah.
most mortals there are, they don't have a choice. They don't have, like being a slave, you don't have a choice. If you're a slave, someone has enslaved you, you didn't have any questions on the matter. And I think the name Slaves to Darkness is a very, very apt choice because you either choose to die and perish and be gone or be part of something that has enslaved the world. I
Mm.
love the idea that the mortal realms chaos is winning. I mean, maybe in terms of game right now, Order is the strongest faction by far in terms of the meta and all that. But
Mm.
in the lore, chaos has won,
Yeah, I mean,
and
it's small bastions of hope essentially fighting back the just
yeah.
overwhelming darkness.
But if you go back, if you focus on someone who tried to save his family, maybe they tried to save their family, maybe they failed. Maybe we're talking about a marauder or a Chaos warrior or something.
Hmm.
That person probably has grown or was born into slavery. But what about the first ones when the gates of Azir closed and the ones that were left outside? What about those people who had a choice? Can you get into that idea? Can you like I love that in
Hmm.
the sense of this is tragic
Hmm.
and horrific, and there is something there.
Hmm.
So there are places in the mortal realms where you can dig out humanity
You know,
and the
okay.
how it turns. That's why I think chaos and even Khorne, in the sense that Khorne, but I'm a Khorne player, and the idea that they need to like go up the stairs, the ladder. Chaos is a ladder, as Littlefinger used to say, but they have to go up because everybody behind them wants to kill them to take their spot.
Yeah, if you stand still,
So
you're dead, right? Like you have to keep
yeah,
climbing. If you ever stop climbing, like the person behind
yeah.
you is just gonna step over you on their way to the top, right? Or step on you rather on their way to the top, and it's
Do
gonna
you
be brutal.
remember? Do you remember the part in Midnight Mass where he said, "The death is a waterfall, like
Oh
death's
yeah, yeah.
what an amazing idea." And that's the point where Corn came to my mind because blood for the blood god, in a sense, how much bloodshed is in the story of that? It must be huge. So of course he's not going to care where the blood flows from because it's so much.
Well, I mean, and
So
I mean that this is the thing is there's like a machismo that's always a sort of I think associated with Korn. Like I think of them in the very fantastical like heavy metal. This is brutal, like the Nathan Explosion
I get it,
sense.
man of war.
Yeah, and pulling it back into a horror light.
Mhm.
The mindset of this character that like okay, so maybe you're desensitized from the gore a little bit in the story like this, but like so
Yeah,
you got to focus on the humanity, right?
yeah.
Like
If you think about it, we're in the middle of, hopefully not in the middle, but we're in a pandemic and we have normalized that. Today, there's a plague in the world, and we have normalized. Can you imagine someone being born in the cult of Khorne? Of course, they will have normalized it. And like, if you try to get into the mind of a mythical human being
Yeah.
in a mythical world,
Yeah.
if we can do it, those can do it as well, in a sense. So what you said, being desensitized by gore and all that, this is what you do. You kill because if you don't kill, you are the one who will die. And let me tell you, as a Khorne player, we have no rend. We wound on fours. There's no machismo there, man. It's fake. They're drawn. The abs and the muscles, they're just drawn. It's just for show.
Yeah, it's
There's
airbrushed, like
nothing there,
the
man.
yeah, they're airbrushed on. There's
Like the Deathbringer hits on threes, wounds on fours, has no rend, damage one. Come on, man.
yeah, but it's the Khorne doesn't care from whence the blood flows. Like he is a Deathbringer, it's just himself. Khorne is a suicide cult, you see. Like that's.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you while we're talking through this, you're talking about like writing prompts for AOS.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is there a hope here that some other people will like maybe hear this episode and like maybe try to write some like get some rantcast horror stories written, like like
Maybe.
yeah.
I mean, I would love to have the chat afterwards because I cannot see the chat right now. But if anyone could throw any horror prompts there, we cannot assure them that they're not going to be used at some point.
Yeah.
But I would love it. It's so easy to, it's food for thought. It's so nice tingling to the brain to throw an idea out. Like, do you remember It Follows?
Yes.
The movie.
Fantastic.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Love that movie. Well, Gotrek is the creature from It Follows. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Talking about Boogeyman.
I mean, Gotrek is
Gotrek
the AOS Boogeyman right now in both senses.
If you're an orc, like an elite unit that cannot kill Gotrek, Gotrek is the thing from It Follows.
Yeah.
Like, run away. So,
yeah.
I mean,
well,
yeah.
I see. I like I think Gotrek in the sort of cultural sense is the boogeyman right now. Everyone's afraid off the table. Like they don't want to face Gotrek and play against Gotrek right now. And what do we do if we run into Gotrek? And like he is like if I would have had this discussion a year ago, I would have been talking about armies as the boogeyman. Change host and KO, and like I would have been talking about armies as the boogeyman. An army that you're just afraid, you're kind of terrified to play against. And right now, it's sort of like one singular model. It is Gotrek, and so like you think about like the sort of the meta consensus, like outside the game, people are afraid of Gotrek. What about the people in the world of Warhammer? Okay, like zooming in that camera. I mean, this has to be the Terminator It Follows on steroids. Like the original Terminator 2 goes a lot less horror, a lot more action.
Let's go back to 1.
Yeah, go back to 1 where it's just, it can't be killed, it can't be reasoned with, it's out to murder you, and it's after you.
And the worst part, the part that adds horror is what I wrote to you like 2 days ago. This thing that comes towards you and kills you, it screams, "Kill me." It's what it does because it wants to die.
Yeah.
So can you imagine this thing trying to say "kill me" and cannot die, and only like slaughters around him, screaming,
and he can't stop.
Nobody can.
Yeah.
How messed up is that?
Yeah.
Like be like a warrior and seeing a flood of your own comrades being there, and there's like a blood storm, like sprayed blood. And there's a shout saying "kill me" all over again, but it never happens.
Well, like
I would have, yeah.
The one writing prompt you were kind of talking about, like I actually do want to see that story where it's like a Trog, like just a peaceful Trog village somewhere in like Gur, away from the wars we all fight, right? Like, cause conceivably we're all like we have all these wars going on across the mortal realms. There's all these reasons for resources and campaigns and Zinchian whatever is going on, right? But just this one
Trog village.
One Trog village. They harvest mushrooms, like there's like probably some pretty badass Trogs who go out and like they kill the big Gurian beasts and keep the villages safe, they They do some magic occasionally. They catch glimpses of the bad moon, but mostly, I mean, the bad moon's never actually ascended over their village, so it only exists in the esoteric, only in the mythologic. The
In
bad
their
moon, like
stories.
literally, one of the gods is in the world pulling the bad moon along with him. Like he can actually just make it come with him. That Trog village randomly in Gur is never going to see the bad moon, right? Like
Yeah.
the realms are infinitely big, and it's just this one village, and then like we focus on like one hunter, right? And he goes out like
Yeah.
one hunting party doesn't come back one night, like of Trog. Like there's
Mhm.
some, they're going out and killing some Gurian huge, like some
Yeah.
megalodon Gurian beast for to feed, and they're gonna have some feast for their like festival feast, right? Like their annual
Yeah.
cool whatever,
Love it.
right? And he's the guy who goes out like he's a hunter and he's maybe a little aged out, right? So he's
Or young.
yeah,
One of
or
the
young,
two.
one or two, right? You got to have some reason why he's not with the main party. But like, is a familiar enough to go find the old party? He finds them all just slaughtered,
Yeah.
right? And you've got that moment where we're just like this was like no beast I know has ever done this. Look at how clean the cuts are, right? And just
This
get into
wound
the horror
doesn't
of
come
it.
from claw. Yeah.
Yeah, this is no claw or fang. Like, get
Yeah.
into it, and then just like slowly develop the story. People like
Yeah.
villagers going out and missing and hearing tales from like maybe a sister Trog village that's
Mm.
spored somewhere else, and like he happens upon
Mhm.
that village, just everyone slaughtered to the man,
Yeah.
and he slowly finds out like that Gotrek did this, and their village is just in Gotrek's path.
Yeah. Just to think walking, shouting, kill me all over again.
Yeah, just and
And
on the horizon, distantly, like you can close out the story without even slaughtering his village, depending on what type of horror you're
no.
going for. And just he hears the Duarden, like look up the Duarden words for it. Like I'm sure it sounds like Celtic or Gallic or something like that. And
Mhm.
just like you write that, just all caps in the wavy, spooky language, echoing off the walls and stuff like that. And then like you can even disguise that he's shouting "kill me," and it's just this guttural, horrible
Mhm.
shout, so you can have that
Yeah,
filter.
if I could see it, the story would take place with only sound. Maybe you would hear the horns of alarm from the village, from the scout or from the guards, and then they start to slaughter them, and there's just shouting and death and this
You never
guttural
see
voice that
Gotrek.
you're talking
Yeah,
about. They don't have no idea what they're saying,
yeah,
and someone maybe gets a glimpse of orange
yeah,
hair
yeah.
in the torches or
Just
something.
just this mane of fire, right? Like this beast, with this mane of fire, its eyes like cloaked
Yeah,
in shadow. Like you never even
it's even
see.
called Troll Slayer. I mean,
Yeah, he's
come
so
on. Yeah.
he's so viscous and caked in gore. You don't even see a dwarf. You never even describe it being a dwarf, right? Like you don't even
No.
because these Troggoths don't have the advantage of perspective. Like they've maybe never heard of Gotrek, you know,
Yeah.
like and
But
they just
maybe they
see
have
this.
heard of a Slayer.
Yeah, they've heard of the Slayer. They've heard some distant myths of
Mhm.
this village eater, this Slayer, right? Like the just
Village Eater, love it. Yeah.
like and just
See,
yeah,
it's there.
yeah.
And it is a boogeyman of AOS. So you can have those things uh, like come into the story, and they would come in like a scything wind, which is what would happen if any of the big guys that we have would appear.
Mm-hmm.
Like whoever it is. In this case, Gotrek would work, but it would be Archeon, it would be Morathi, anything that colossal in power. It would be like too big for them to understand, too big for them to handle, and that would be horror in the mortal realms.
See, I
Like an
want
AOS horror story doesn't have names, but you do understand whose influence is it from.
yeah. See, I almost want a story now where like where one of Nagash's avatars has shown up to an area and just snuffed
Mm-hmm.
out the life instantly. But the people in the plot don't know that they all just died.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this sort of like uh uh what is it? The others, like sort of
Mm-hmm.
like the inverted haunted house story where like
Right.
they go on to gradually find out that they all died in just
Yeah.
kind of like the wink of an eye, and
Yeah.
these like ghosts that they're being haunted by are like the literal battle of a bunch of stormcast and shit that are still alive, and they're only catching phantoms and glimpses of. And in their
Amazing.
story, the people who like so people then start like so things go kind of like hyper real for a little bit because as Nagash's
Mhm.
presence, everyone has been wiped out of it. They've all died instantly, but their souls are left behind, right? And the
Mhm.
world starts, in a Jacob's Ladder sense, just starting getting really gradually weirder and weirder. And the
And
people that
dimmer.
they know begin becoming the various tormented spirits for like his legion, but they don't see the like model, and
The
they just see
team.
their
They don't
friends
have that
wasting
team.
away, and one of them goes psychotic and starts killing, kills a bunch of them, and like
Mhm.
you have a little bit of a crazies plot where they're all losing themselves in this
Yeah.
world that they don't realize that they've been suddenly thrust into a sort of purgatory. And then that's a story where I do want the last shot to actually go outside of their like shadow realm, of their little
Mhm.
purgatory, and we get that shot of the village. You know, like maybe like a fucking some Stormcast guy has beaten back whatever Nagashian avatar, and they're looking at just all of the wretched bodies just
Yeah.
strewn about, and just like, man, they I hope they died quick type thing, and like, or
Mm.
some
Right.
throwaway line where like at least they died quick. But we know of the story we just read that quick
Oh,
for
yeah.
them was like a week of just horrible atrocity, like
Agony. Yeah.
right, and
Mm.
tragedy, yeah. And
Phew, man, things start coming up. I hope we give some food for thought to our friends in the chat because that's like Idneth Deepkin have that the idea of forgotten nightmares,
mhm.
the idea that you don't remember
Oh,
the thing that attacked you. Like you imagine people like a group running away from their place of habitat,
mhm.
and at once they forget why they're running, and then it happens again, and they're in a chase where they always forget what's happening. Like this can be like because they have raiding parties where they go for souls,
Mhm.
and the idea of being chased by something, then you're like, do you remember Memento when there's that scene where it says, all right, he was running and then he stops and says, why am I running? And then he looks back and the person chasing him is behind him, and so he starts running again. And one thing that I noticed in Age of Sigmar very early was that it had to do a lot with identity. There was the theme of identity was huge in Age of Sigmar. Maybe it was in sort of a meta way they were still trying to see what happens, but the idea that Stormcast tend to forget part of themselves when they're being reforged, or that Scarbrand was he's the strongest weapon of Khorne, and he has completely lost his identity. He's just a weapon,
Mhm.
and you see that in I don't remember other parts right now, but the idea of losing your identity, or Flesh Eater Courts, again, a lot of horror there. And what you said about comedy, you can have you can make a stand-up comedy show only on Flesh Eater Courts if you think about it, but at the same time it can be also tragic. So this idea of identity for from this part is who and where they are, and that is that was a big part of Age of Sigmar when it started. So I would catch those themes a lot there
Well, even
in
like
the
Night
beginning.
Haunt are like sort of one of the vanguard of our armies is I'm the death player, obviously. Their whole thing is like they're sort
Everybody
of
knows that.
torments. They're sort of trapped in whatever they're punished with their identities in life. Like
Yeah.
they're literal. If you were this horrible murderer, you become one of the executioners in the afterlife, and all you
Mhm.
have for your fate is just sort of looping on this thing
Mhm.
this pronounced identity, or this sort of equivocal
It
identity
does
that
go
you.
back to the Greek mythology, what you said with the pettiness and maliciousness
Yeah,
of like Nagash in that sense. He turns them into that
yeah,
with that
yeah,
almost childish glee maliciousness of you did that, I'm going to do it to you, and like the Greek gods did to the characters
yeah,
in mythological stories.
yeah. Yeah, Ossiarch Bone
And
Reapers are. I wonder if they speak to me so much because Ossiarch Bone Reapers are, they're like an amalgam. They're a gish of souls, and
mhm,
I sometimes have crises of identity where I'm just like I feel like my mind never shuts up, and there's just a bunch of me living inside my own head.
mhm.
Um, and uh, and I wonder if there's something about that just I love this idea of I mean, obviously, being a dirty socialist, I'm a big fan of all these people coming together to work towards the common good goal of Nagash. Right?
I
Um,
live in Sweden, my friend. Yeah, that's how it is.
that's what the subtext is there. It's about socialism. No, orange soda if there is, or a Sprite.
Since you mentioned the Osiark Bone Reapers, I don't know if people in the chat have read the story that came out during Broken Realms. I was saying that there was that story that came out during the Broken Realms era on Osiark Bone Reapers. Did you read that? Where they were playing the chess game.
No, I
Did
didn't
you
read this
catch
one. I
that
didn't read
story?
this one. No, no, no. Where
I
was
think you
this?
will enjoy it. There was during Broken Realms. There was a short story on Osiark Bone Reapers, and it's the character from the box from the Ogre's box
Vokmordian.
where where he plays a sort of a well he plays Warhammer in a sense, but he plays a chess game that the Bone Reapers have created, and I loved it. I loved the idea that they have culture, that they have libraries, that they have all that sense of almost like Catacross is Alexander the Great. Even his name in Greek, it's not Alexander, it's Alexandros Catacross. It's
Mm-hmm.
there. I can hear it and Xanthos as well.
Mm-hmm.
These are Greek names and maybe even Roman with Roman influences, of course. But I love the idea that they have their
Well,
own
we all know the
culture.
Greeks were better than the Romans. The Romans just pretended they wrote all of history. Like that's.
Well, they came afterward, so you know they had things to see. But yeah, I think that if I had started the game around that time, I would have built myself Ossiarch Bone Reaper's army. I hope they start playing more like they're. It feels like a very strategic army. I wish that if you like, I'm not gonna pretend I'm great at the game. I'm good at the game, but I would love to be able to play where a game where strategy is important, where you feel like you have Catacross and you can lead your legions the way he reads in Wrath of the Everchosen, for example. I
They
love that idea.
they when they first came out, they really did feel like that.
Yeah.
Because they had RDP and they had an abundance of it, and you were
Mhm.
making these decisions, and the slowness of the army actually really does play to the feeling like you're like a strategic general, because you have to like
Yeah.
set up your schemes and follow through with your plans, and they really did play like that. But when everybody
Mhm.
got the command abilities like sort of the same way, and now other people have more decisions to make than Ossiarch Bone Reapers do,
Sort of
like
broke, I guess.
yeah, it cheapened our thing. It sort of it had to like it sort of sacrificed our thing to make
Mhm.
everyone have a better thing. And in a general
Mhm.
sense, I'm happy the whole game got better. And honestly, like I will like a prop like an appropriate hero, I am happy to sacrifice for the greater good. It's
On
okay, I
your
don't
sword.
mind.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
hopefully down the line we get a wave 2 OBR and they feel like they should again. I love the sort of like great conquering like like you said Catacross Alexander the Great. Like
Mhm.
I think that's there.
Or Caesar.
His whole
Or
thing.
Caesar. Even in the lore, they do that. He became Caesar
Yeah.
for he did not give back the leadership when he was done with the war. There's so much stuff in the Osiarch Bone Reapers lore that comes straight from ancient Greek and Roman times. By the way, Khorne plays like that. Khorne does play like that. There is no run and charge. There is no rend. There is no damage 2. There's damage D6. Yay.
Which means
You have
damage too.
to,
Which means damage too.
yeah,
You'll roll the 2
exactly.
every time.
On a hit of 4 plus, remind you, the bloodthirster hits on a 4 plus, like Jesus wept. And so, but you have to strategize and think like, if I have this bubble here in the next round, like there's nothing more like the last paint job I did was a Bloodstoker. I made my own Bloodstoker. The Bloodstoker has a great ability that gives you reroll wounds and +3 to run or charge. The thing is, you have to be wholly within 8, and you have to like see the matrix
Yeah, there's Venn
and say, all right,
diagrams of just.
2 turns from now, where can he be and that unit that I would like to buff be?
Mhm.
There is nothing like 16-inch, wholly within 16 inches of the Blood Secretor. That's huge. Like this is royalty for Khorne. So you have to play a bit like that. I wish it was a bit different. I'm not gonna lie. Wish it was a little bit more potent, but it is what it is. So talking about speaking of horror, a very very dedicated Khorne player is going to go to a tournament of vast shooting. Like Sweden, the Swedish meta loves shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not looking forward to that part. But yeah, we'll see.
It's just like a horror story is like about this Khorne champion, but there's one gun just circulating out in the wilderness somewhere, and just like he's
Yeah.
just sweating, fearing the day he has to like. like
Needed.
I have conquered many a villages. My lord, you have, but none of them have had ranged weaponry before. And like he has to like be proud and like stoic for like his
Exactly.
soldiers and just like
Yeah. Yeah. Oh well. Oh well.
oh no, it's I think like tone is tone and where you place the camera like the sort of two major keys to writing horror. Like you can take most Green Room is a really good that was in the coffin earlier, the
Hmm.
Jeremy Saulnier or Saulnier, I'm not certain how to pronounce the name. Has like I mean it's just like a really band goes and plays concert, finds out they got booked for a like a Nazi rally basically, and then like it just decays into this like horror story. And
Horror
you're
story.
like
Yeah.
it's such a mundane it's a very mundane story. There's no fantasticalness at all to
No.
it. The most
No.
fantasticness is like there's like a scene with some dogs.
Mm.
And I guess it's a little fantastical to see Captain Picard as like the main Nazi, which is like
Yeah.
freaking gnarly as hell.
Talk about throw you outside of the suspension of disbelief
Well,
where we talked about it.
he's such a strong actor that like
Yeah.
I buy it after like the sort of first couple scenes.
You know, I told you about Halloween in Dublin and me and my pregnant wife doing all the horror things. We
Yeah,
watched The Exorcist in the theater. We watched the theater
the theatrical version.
rendition of The
Yeah,
Exorcist,
yeah.
and the voice of the devil was Sarah Ann McKellen. So that threw me out.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he's amazing.
At
He's
the
one of the
time, yeah.
best in the first. But still, you could hear the devil saying all the things that he says to the girl, and I'm still thinking, come on, Gandalf,
Yeah,
snap
Gandalf.
out of it, man.
Yeah, Gandalf. Yeah.
So yeah, that didn't help me. My wife freaked out. My
Well,
pregnant wife freaked out during that. So
I
my our boys are very galvanized. I think
yeah, no,
they
it's
made it out.
yeah, no, it's cool. See, it's weird like cuz some horror doesn't it some horror very much is horror for its time and place, you know?
Yeah,
I feel like books are the written word. This is where the written word tends to hold up a little bit better than like film. I think film will always
yeah,
be bound a little bit by the technology of its time, and actors carry with them certain, you know, things that can break your immersion, right? Like,
yeah.
um,
Because they carry the roles in a sense, if you think about it.
yeah,
Because you see the character, but sometimes you cannot not see the actor.
right, right.
Especially when there's like they're big actors, they will either do what they do, and you're gonna be okay with it. But still, like what you said with Captain Picard being the Nazi leader or Gandalf being the devil,
Hmm.
you cannot. Sometimes you just can't. You just can't. There's too much allure there.
Hmm.
You cannot not believe.
Hmm.
But with books, you create them in your mind. I wanted to ask you earlier, since you talked about Flanagan, and one of my favorite films of his is Gerald's Game. And when he talked about monologues, he did that. He made it into, he pulled it off. He pulled that book off into a film.
Hmm.
And it's basically one person in a room talking with herself. I want to ask you, without not going into talking about the author himself, what's your favorite work by King?
By Stephen King.
Without any need to discuss if he's good or not.
I,
That's not part of the discussion.
I actually kind of want to I do kind of want to stand for Stephen King a little bit, if I may.
Hmm.
I know that
Sure.
I'm immediately rejecting your question on the face, but
No
hear
worries.
me out.
No worries.
I
I
think
mean, if
Stephen
you don't
King
want to, that's what I meant.
I think Stephen King ends up in that sort of hipster space where like sometimes it becomes trendy to hate on popular stuff. You
Hmm.
know what I'm saying? Where like it's weird. Like sometimes there's this weird belief that if something is like if something has any air of legitimacy but is unpopular, it's
Hmm.
it's underrated. It's way better than people realize. Oh, it's this is actually like the
Hmm.
best. And then if something's like super popular, then it's like it's overrated. It's kind of crap. Blah 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 blah. Stephen King
I hear them a lot.
is an enigma to me because he is as a crafter of horror unquestionably great. As a
Yeah.
writer, he knows how to write great fiction, but he gets carried away. He can't.
May I give you a pause there?
Yeah, go ahead.
But what I've I would, as we say, I would sign what you said, put it there, 100%, and on the same wavelength. I always said that if you would write 3 times less, fewer books, he's still the master craftsman. He's still a master of horror. He can write, he can make you cry or laugh or feel really scared. But he wrote too much. There's such a thing as too much, I feel.
Yes.
Like if I said if you didn't write a book a year, but you wrote one book every 3 years, you would still be the Stephen King that we know. But those books would have been, I cannot even imagine. His best moments, we would still have those. That's how I feel about Stephen King. There's such a thing as too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the last book I read of him was The Outsider, and I felt that book was too long. It's not always bad. There's books that are lengthier of his, and I still love them.
The Stand
But
comes to
I
mind
felt that
as
I
like
wish, yeah, I wish it was less. And my favorite book of his is Gerald's Game, actually.
really.
For some reason, it resonated in me. I read it like in a day, in a Kindle, on a bed. So that was there, and I will never forget. I will never forget. It's one of my favorite moments in a story. If you remember the end where she's in the courthouse and she sees the man, and the man looks at her and he goes like this, he does that. Goosebumps, man. I love that idea when he sees her and he recognizes her as the woman who's tied like that with the hands up. That moment was pure brilliance for me.
Yeah.
He wrote it, he brought it out the way he should have done. There's books of his I love. There's books of his when I was thinking, why did you write this? You could have just not written it and still be amazing.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about King. I don't hate on him. I'm glad he exists.
Yeah.
He has made more horror writers than there would have been, but he has still ruined writers who tried too much to do what he
To
does.
be like
and
King,
what he does is his.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean,
I see it a lot in Greek literature as well. I see people reading my books and saying, "Wow, this reminds me of Stephen King." And every time I hear that, I'm thinking, "Well, that means that you just read Stephen King."
Yeah. What King
You
are we
read
talking
Stephen
about
King
here?
uphill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to
Like,
stand. I had to stand Stephen King a little bit before I got to your question because, like, I think there is legitimate criticism to Stephen King, that like I don't disagree with, but like I feel like people need to recontextualize even how they think about him, and I was hoping to do that a little bit, like because he is the king, like he is the king of horror, like there's just kind of no way around it. So when you ask what my favorite Stephen King book is, it's The Skeleton Crew.
you went back to the short story, right?
Yeah, so I had to set up the premise. Like I love the Gunslinger and the Dark Tower series. The Dark Tower series is like I don't know if you watch anime, but I know some of Chat Gang does. There's like anime out there where it'll be just like the best anime series you've ever seen. They tend to run about 26 episodes. And this thing ends up happening with them where like the last 4 episodes are garbage and retroactively ruins the whole anime series, and then you don't even like it anymore. The Dark Tower, yeah, the Dark Tower was like that, where like it just I don't mind the like I actually kind of liked the metaverse stuff where he's like kind of tying all of his stories together. Like I actually in my RPGs have recurring characters that are like mostly just cameos. Like we don't really ever spend time with them. I just mention like a shopkeep and I describe them in the same way that like a shopkeep is in this other world. And you go, wait a minute, is that like if you've played in a couple of my games, you go, oh hey, that's the same guy. Or like I use the same names on a couple characters, and if you play in a few of my games, you recognize the names. And then that question that might come to a player's mind but might not is like, oh, is it the same person? And again, it's really not. It's never really for the players because it's. I'm not like calling attention to it. It's for me, and I it's just something fun I do, and it has to do with the nature of my creativity and like how I think that in a sense that there is sort of this infinite staircase, to use a Gary Gygax like old module, that there is this sort of like infinite staircase of knowledge and creativity that just you're always walking on and going up, and all the world if you can never find the door to it, you can walk through between all of the worlds and find them all. So I do like the conceit of the Dark Tower. I love the Gunslinger. The first book in the series is absolutely excellent. But like as I think it's around like book 4 is when he took his big break, and it all has like
Yeah.
it all reads one way to like all the way up to about like book 4, and then like didn't write a word, and then suddenly he had like 5, 6 out of nowhere, and then 7 out of nowhere on a slight delay, and I was just like, and it just the experience just it all kind of unraveled for me, and
You can see it. Yeah.
it'll all hold a special place in my heart forever as like just one of
Sure.
my most formative series. I will
Hmm.
say unironically, unabashedly, I love the Dark Tower, but I can't
Hmm.
say that it's like a favorite or even think it's good anymore. You know, like
Gotcha. I
it's
get it.
complicated.
No. No.
Um,
And what you talked about bringing stuff together, it's something that writers love to do, creators love to do.
it's
It's
something I
the
didn't.
reason why. Yeah.
I hated it as a kid. I thought it was cheesy when writers did it, and as I've gotten older, I get it now. You know, like I.
I think that there's a fine line. It shouldn't be look what I'm doing here. That shouldn't be it. It's like in Midnight Mass, the book Midnight Mass exists in Hush.
Mhm.
Like the writer, the main character is the writer of Midnight Mass, and or in Midnight Mass in the Recreation Center, the mirror from Oculus is in the backdrop. It's in the back. It's on the stage. So it's not drawing attention. You're not going like in Indiana Jones 4, where the camera just leaves the scene where it's happening, just goes and focuses on the ark inside a broken crate. That is just like pandering, and nobody cared. Nobody said, "Oh my God, it's the ark."
Mhm.
No, because the camera literally left the scene and went
Mhm.
and focused on a broken crate where the ark is there. That doesn't really make sense. So, and it is cheesy, as you said. It feels forced,
Mhm.
and it has no sentiment. But when it works the way you said, when one of your uh, players say, "Oh, I remember that guy,"
Mhm.
and you would be okay in the story, if you would have a place in the story, they would have a place in the story, even if they nobody remembered them.
Mhm.
That's always so nice, and you do it for yourself,
Mhm.
because when you create something, you create it also for yourself.
Mhm.
It's a thing that you enjoy.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I mean,
Yeah, well, people
you know.
ask like, why don't I, they always ask like this weird question that's like not even in the right realm of thinking about it. Like people ask me if I like writing or if and like yeah, I like writing. Like I like finishing a story more than I like writing a story. Writing a story is
I
agony.
like writing a story. I love having written a story.
Yeah, yeah. Like I like the exploration and the stuff like that, but like I like finishing a story way better. Like having a written story
Mhm.
is the best part of it, because it's a battle to kind of write it sometimes, but it
I
can be
get it. Yeah,
energizing and stuff. But I don't
I
write
know.
because I like it. I write
Mhm.
because I have to. Like I must write.
I
If
get
I
it.
actually get crankier, and I was talking to the last episode before this was with Dr. Alex. We were talking about like
Happiness.
satisfaction and positive psychology and stuff. And he talked about like flow state as like an actual psychological thing where you like end up in the flow state. And what he was
Mhm.
talking about like having lasting satisfaction in your life and stuff like that. And I've recognized about myself if I go a long period of time without creating a story, I'm crankier,
Mhm.
I'm more agitated, I'm just I'm not the best version of myself. And as he was
Mhm.
talking about it and what he was describing, I'm like, oh, writing for me unlocks that flow state, but then all these other positive psychology like reinforcement stuff. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that explains like I'm literally going through like a sort of like psychological withdrawal from the feelings I associate with writing because it's all just it's all just brain chemicals, and they don't really know the
Yeah,
difference between getting serotonin from this and that,
which
right?
is real. It's fine. It's still real.
Yeah, it is
Whatever
real.
the
No, it
symptom
is real. I'm
is.
just like it's my brain's not
You know
addicted
what?
to an esoteric of writing. It's the actual chemicals that occur when I
Gotcha.
do it. Um,
That's how I feel right now with painting. Actually, I've lost that a little bit with writing. I have it with painting right now. I feel
mm,
like I have to paint. I have that feeling that when I'm done, like I don't know how many times I said, "Now I'm done with corn," and now I'm done with this one, and and still the next day I'm like, I'm putting all the paints back now. With being within a house with two toddlers, everything has to be sealed in bags and all that. And every day I like put them away, and the next day they come out for something new. And that's how I feel right now. I have to paint. I have to create something because writing is not that easy right now, especially because of, I'm on parental leave, and there's two of them, so there isn't too much mental capacity for that.
Yeah.
But painting has turned more into a muscular thing right now, and it feels like at the end of the day, the boys are alive, the boys are fed, the boys are happy and healthy, and that's the most important thing. At the same time, there's something that I created, I can look back to it.
Hmm.
So I will get back to writing next year. That's how I feel. I have a couple ideas that I want to uh, put on the page, and actually, this discussion that we're having now, right now helps a lot. It it's great to talk about things. I know this is a show right now, but still, this
Hmm.
is like a discussion that I can have. It's right here. It's one after 1 a.m. here. It's
Hmm.
101 right
Hmm.
now. It's after midnight. Haven't slept in, I don't know. They have a bad night yesterday, and still I could do this for hours.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's always nice to talk about it, and then the love of creating and making stories and making characters and making like pain and love and everything like that. It's always there.
Hmm.
It's always there. You can never stop. Can you imagine yourself stopping to create? What if even if it's a story or an idea for a campaign or even for a one-off
Well,
session?
it's
I can't.
I I don't know. Like I sometimes I try to like think about what it must be like to not be me. Like there's a fondness there, and I like you never really know what's going on in other people's heads, and that's what's kind of
Hmm.
beautiful about like literally the spoken word and the written word is like I can take and put a thought in your head that wasn't there previously, but you never know what's like going on inside people, and I do wonder like because sometimes it feels like I'm afflicted by this need to create, and that like
Hmm.
there might just be people out there that aren't, and sitting in the hobbyist circle in AOS, like the number of people I meet who they don't necessarily think of themselves as artists or creative, but like they still everything they describe to me, where they come home and they have to paint a model, or like that's their me time or that's their time. Like I'm like, no, you're describing what I think being creative and creating stuff is. You're just taking it more, I guess, literally in painting, and you don't think it's the same thing because you're not making something from nothing like a writer or whatever. And I'm like writers don't make something from nothing. Our inspirations might as well be on a sprue somewhere. It's I'm just going to snip off a bit from the Skeleton Crew. I'm going to snip off a bit from
Yeah.
from Cowboy
From this
Bebop, and
discussion.
I'm just this discussion. I'm going to clip all these bits, and I'm just going to like make my own little kit bash of ideas, and that's the story I write. Like people
Yeah.
like it's I guess it's like I said, it's esoteric, but it's not so much different to me. I think
Hmm.
painting and creating and art is I think it's about the best thing humanity's got. Um,
Yeah.
how boring it must have been to have to only survive and not have time for leisure and to create things for the sake of creating things, right?
That's what I'm thinking of people who don't like speculative fiction. I mean, or people who don't read or consume art in the sense, whether it's a film or series or a book or whatever.
Mhm.
How is that? For me, I cannot fathom that life.
I
Like I cannot even understand how the how life's everything has took them to that place where it's okay to go to work and come back and love your family and do if you're in a happy place,
Yeah.
but not consume everything. Like we're so lucky. I know the doom scrolling
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just
yeah.
going on social
I
media
think
and
I
all
know where you're
that,
going. I like
it
this.
takes a huge part of everybody's day. But like we're so glad that Kindle exists, for example, or even books, but in whatever form. I mean, that's what I mean. We're so lucky that it's there. You
Yeah.
can read, like, you can read one of my stories right now, in a sense, but you are an ocean away.
Mm.
You're on the other side. Like it's like I said, it's after midnight here,
Yeah.
and still, we
Well,
have the choice to do that. So people who cannot say I don't read science fiction, I don't like fantasy, I don't like horror, I don't like spec fic, said, don't you like the idea that you can add layers in that sense? You can add spice in your food.
hmm
You can eat instead of just feeding,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think it's easy to get doomer pilled, like about reality
mhm,
and life and stuff like that. And like there's historic levels of wealth inequality across most of the developed world. There's a lot of labor exploitation, especially in the southern hemisphere. Like there's a lot of stuff to be aware of, to be sympathetic toward, to hopefully do your small part to unravel some
yep,
of that mess in reality. Climate
mhm,
crisis is very very real and very looming. Like, um, all those things that we get doomer pilled over and we feel powerless over, and so on and so forth. Like, it's like, I hear you, message received, people. I'm human too, and I worry about that
mhm,
stuff a lot. But like, there's a song that by a band called Spanish Love Songs, and he recounts this. He like regales this whole situation in the song of just all this terrible stuff going on, and then he
mhm,
says in this shaking voice, the music all cuts out, and he goes, he's like, I swear I'm an optimist. Like, and then just the music starts banging, and it picks up again. And ever since I heard that song where he's just regaling this like sad sort of tragic situation, he goes, I swear I'm an optimist, and then it
mhm,
starts like rocking out again. I've thought, I'm like, that's me. I'm like, but I swear I'm an optimist. Like, of all these
yeah,
horrible things, and that I want to, in my small way, make a dent, and in all the ways I can try to, personally affect things that are way bigger than I could ever imagine. Um,
yeah,
but I still sit around and I look and I go, humanity gives me hope, and we live in a
yeah.
good time. Like,
I agree.
humanity gives
The
me hope
long peace,
because,
as you're saying. No.
like, I don't think the response to like all these crises is to do nothing, but I do think there's some
On.
levity to be had. Like the my dystopian speculative fiction that I loved consuming growing up says that it's just going to be Tank Girl when the climate crisis all hits. And like, no, we're gonna hit that like point of no return very soon here. Things
Mm,
are gonna get bad and water levels are gonna rise, and like all the bad stuff's gonna happen. There's gonna be famine, fatigue. There's gonna be a lot of stuff, or fatigue or famine's gonna happen. There's gonna be a lot of stuff that happens, and it's gonna percolate throughout, especially the undeveloped worlds and the worlds that imperialism has sort of uh, exploited to make the quote unquote developed nations, and so on and so forth. And they're gonna get hit
mhm.
the hardest. It's gonna hit all that stuff sucks.
Well, I'm an immigrant from a country that had the worst economic crisis of Western world nation ever, the longest crisis, the Greek economic crisis.
We thought
It hit
Greece would no
me
longer be
when
a
I was,
sovereign. There was a point in
yep,
modern history where we thought Greece would no longer be a sovereign nation.
it's true. And I went through that. I lived through it. I had my own business, and I started my own business in 2010, and the crisis hit literally in 2009. So, in the worst economic crisis of all, I literally started my own business, and I had to sell it and become an immigrant and go to a new country. And still, I say to my wife, we live in the brightest timeline.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm saying, I keep saying, and I know I'm an optimist, and I know that I have it good, but seeing it from the outside, you can say, wow. Like I'm trying to think of my dad, who has worked his whole life and he still works, and he had both of his sons leave the country,
Mm-hmm.
and he knows that like his grandkids are not there. They're like half a continent away on the other side of Europe, but he can see them every day, and they're happy, and they have their own. We have our own house, we have our jobs, we have a salary, things that my own friends back home, if any is left, like there's one of them. I have one childhood friend who still lives in Greece. There's one in the States. There's two in Italy. There's more than one in the States, actually. There's another one in Sweden. There's one in Germany. There's two in the United Kingdom. Everybody has gone, but all of our parents are still back. So I can try to see it from that side, from the point of view of the parent. And I'm thinking that this person he's worked all his life and had his sons leave,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no pension for them because, again, Greece is a wreck.
Yeah.
And still he says, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
I like that's normalizing, that's optimism, that's what it is. That's the idea that, oh, there's worse. But this person loves speculative fiction. So in that sense, you can see that like stories don't tell us that dragons exist. Stories tell us that dragons can be killed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I like that. I don't see someone who has left life just take its toll day in, day out, but still consumes this speculation, the what if.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I really don't get people who cannot. And I'm actually feel I cannot imagine, I cannot think of a specific person, but I can say, oh, that's sad. That's sad. People like we Warhammer players say, oh, you play with plastic toys. I'm quite
yeah.
sad for the person who just sees that, because we don't see that.
No.
It's
No.
not just plastic toys.
Well, see,
It's so
that's
much more than that.
it is. It is. I mean, that, and that's kind of where I'm going with it. Is I don't wish, like, it told the story about the song, and and your personal story. I think really hammers it home better than I ever possibly could. Is that despite all things, I'm still an optimist because I see humanity's capacity to continue
Mm-hmm.
in the face of, quite frankly, historic levels of malaise. And like, the technology has changed, but there's a lot of the same problems cropping up. And I'm like, oh yeah, but we're still like it's not just, the world's not just going to turn into Tank Girl. And even if it
No.
did, like, we'd build cities in the desert because humanity's got this, like, we've got that power. We
Mm-hmm.
write dystopian fiction and think of a worst case scenario because we can imagine a better one. And
Yeah.
if you can imagine a better case scenario, you're never without hope, and there's never not a chance to, like, correct the ship. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, for me, writing is exploring some of that, and it's putting ideas and thoughts out there. If I write these characters where they have supernatural threats that are demons and ghosts and monsters, and where they're haunted by these tragedies that take on a very literal and palpable effect in their world, and they get through it,
Mm-hmm.
then I can get through, you know, my rotting ceiling.
Every day.
I can
Yeah.
get through my workload that's too heavy. And yeah, some of it's copium and it's cope, and I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But the point isn't to be dismissive of that stuff. It's to know that we can, that there is a better case scenario, and we can work toward it. And we have this time period we're alive in where we have access to, like, quite frankly, an abundance of humanity that we were cut off from before.
Mm-hmm.
All the art and the people, like,
Present and past.
yeah, like, all these
Yeah.
things that I can just access that I never had the possibility. And, like, you get the bad with it too, because
Well,
there's some bad
that's human.
corners of the demons are out there, right? They're haunting all the good
Sure.
places too. But you have this, I don't know, man. Like, sometimes I just sit around, and, like, when things feel the worst, I remind myself that I lived in the same time period of all, what, the 65,000 years the human species has been on the planet. Maybe it's closer to 200,000, because
100,000.
100,000,
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay.
It's a number that we cannot like
Yeah, yeah,
understand and stuff.
yeah. But
Yeah.
in that whole span of time, in any, like, flash of that time period I could have, blipped into and blipped out of, I existed in a time where I got to, like, play fucking Warhammer, start a podcast
Mm-hmm.
talking about Warhammer. I got to
And see
listen to
Journey's the
David
sound too.
Bowie, like David Bowie, Freddie Mercury and Eddie Hazel, like, and Maynard James Keenan, like, all in the, like, I
Mm-hmm.
could just consume all that music. I can
Yeah.
watch The Exorcist, and then turn on, Midnight Mass. And I know, yeah, dangers of being
Mm-hmm.
opiated, but I think there's some, like I said, there's a lot of humanity to
Yeah.
access right now. And if that doesn't give you hope, I don't know. Like I said,
When you
like, I
told
can
me
see all the
about
doomer
your,
stuff too, but, like, I swear I'm an optimist.
when you told me about your kids and they're like, yeah, that's what dad does. Doesn't that excite you? That
Yeah,
you can show them so much stuff.
yeah,
You can show them and see them find stuff that you couldn't even. understand. I couldn't even think about. It gives me such a perspective.
Yeah.
Like I know that like they say Age of Sigmar is a game of dads. I'm like, you know what? I'm looking forward to that. I don't know if my wife does, but I am looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I
they
I
always.
think it's a good time to be alive, but I think everybody can say that, and maybe mean it, maybe not all the time. When I got married, when I got in, said no life is perfect,
Yeah.
but there are perfect moments, and this is a perfect moment. I remember saying that because I suddenly found myself with people looking at me, and I said, wow, okay, I have to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it came to mind. Like, no life is perfect, but there are perfect moments, and this is a perfect moment. And this right here, my friend, this is a great moment. I
Yeah.
love this.
Yeah.
Talking about Age of Sigmar, but not really talking about Age of Sigmar. Talking about horror, but not even talking about horror. Like I said, it's universal, it's human. We talk about human things because we can.
Yeah.
And look at that. This is Sweden, that's the States.
Yeah.
And we can do that, which
Yeah.
is amazing.
Yeah. It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I always think that you got to end an episode on a high like this. So I mean, there's any anything you want to go back to, any final thoughts, any prompts that you didn't get to, anything like that. This is what we call the final soapbox. The um,
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think so. I think what we had as a discussion is what I had in my mind. That we're gonna talk Age of Sigmar horror. I love this, and this was it. But it was even better than that
mm-hmm,
because we talked about like things that people we like similar minds
mm-hmm,
start riffing off each other,
yeah,
and I love it. And to bring it together, last February, the editor of a publishing house in the States sent me an email. We said we're gathering horror stories from all around the world, and we asked a few people in Greece, and your name it came up with every one of them. And so, do you have a story for us? I said, you know what? I will look. And there's a story that uh, I really, really love, and I translated it and I sent it, and they got it. So it's going to come out in January, I think. It's the Valancourt Book of World Horror Stories, Best Horror Story of the World, Volume 2. I think Volume 1 was on the Shirley Jackson Awards. It's actually quite legit, and it's a story that has a little bit of a Warhammer riff. There's a little bit of that. It's meat, parental horror. It's a husband and wife, and they're taking their baby to its christening, but they're taking it back to the village where she's from. But there's a sort of a sinister reason they're going there. And the first phrase of the short story is, "We're not giving away the baby." That's how the story begins.
mm-hmm,
It's called Firstborn. There's a little bit of Warhammer, uh, let's say, Easter egg in there for the people to get it. But I wrote it just for me. I would never in a million years would think that Warhammer people could read it, but there we are. Here we
yeah,
are. So that comes out in February, and that's where I found the streams cross before this day.
that's funny.
And that I'm I'm just glad we had this discussion.
Yeah,
I loved it. I'm gonna watch it again. I know that I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be driving to Malmö in a couple of weeks, and it's a 3 hour drive. So I would love to like go through the chat and see what people say because this was just a talk between two friends. That's how I felt.
yeah,
So thank you very much for that.
yeah, yeah. You'll
And
have to get me some internalizing stuff that you just said. You're gonna have to
mhm,
message me real quick so I can get links on that. And then we'll
sure,
have you come back on in February.
yeah, man,
Do a Rantcast book tour. Come on
yeah, come
and
back.
hype the story. I could actually have read it then. Because I know you said like some of your stuff is like written in like it's not written in English
My
basically. It's
novels and my short story collection is in Greek.
yeah.
Okay, because it's not the author's work to translate. It's the publishers. And even though my publishers are actually quite big, they're the ones that have Stephen King and Tolkien and Barker and most of them. Still, the thing is bad. The things are bad, economically speaking. It doesn't really happen. You don't see the publishers taking the toll to translate it would cost like 5, 6, 7,000 well, euros, dollars doesn't really matter. It's pretty much similar to actually translate work
Mm-hmm,
and then send it out and see if they want it,
mm-hmm,
which is sad, but it is what it is. But I do have quite a few short stories in, like in Lamplight magazine in the States. Is what I mean. And there are a few there. So I would love to read some of yours if you want to read some of mine.
Yeah, no,
Or
I'll
even
send you. I got a couple. I'll send you a couple links, and you send me a
that's
couple
great.
links, and I'll be sure to share your links in the description below the video
Yeah.
here, so people can check out your work as well. And looking forward to February. That so yeah, come back on Rantcast. I know it seems like a wise, but a ways away, but that time flies. So
Time flies.
I'll be. I think I'll be laid off then, so I'll be doing nothing but consuming like Warhammer and horror and
Or creating.
yeah, creating. Hopefully, that's always the dream. All right, chat gang. You know this part. You are the show within the show. The reason we do this thing. This has been an absolute blast, man. This was a fantastic, a perfect Mephistober or Halloween episode of Rantcast. Kind of about everything I'm about in one show. If there's a pilot show for like what Rantcast is, I think this is probably probably it. So thank you so much for coming on and being a part of this. This is really great.
Good thing, man.
All right, chat gang. Remember, drink your milk, pay your taxes. We'll see you next time.